So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to. So we are back with a brand new movie on what if Naruto was Exile led to a new era for the Shinobi Alliance. Movie, but before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. A figure sighed as he looked at the scroll that had arrived at noon. It contained details of the Fourth Shinobi War that had occurred in the Elemental Nations, but surprisingly it wasn't hidden villages against each other. In fact, it was all 5 great hidden villages, as well as all the other smaller hidden villages against Akatsuki and the Hidden Sound Village. Turns out both Madara Uchiha and Orochimaru bolstered their forces with missing nins and thugs to rival the other hidden villages in terms of manpower, and it seemed that they were winning, especially since they were using the Biju that they extracted out of their Jinchuriki. So far they had the Ichibi, Sanbi, Yanbi, Gobi, Rokubi and the Hachibi, but they didn't have the Nibi, Nanabi or the Kyubi. Nibi's Jinchuriki was cornered by Akatsuki, but then a stranger came and literally obliterated the Akatsuki members Hidan and Kakazu, following that the Jinchuriki just disappeared of the face of the Elemental Nations. The Nanabi's Jinchuriki was a different story. She was being hunted by her own villagers who wanted to beat her for being a Jinchuriki, but after she had rounded into an alleyway she found a dead end. When they were about to attack her though, they were slaughtered and the Jinchuriki was gone. Finally the Kyubi's Jinchuriki simply vanished after he had been exiled. Many people had looked for him, but they had no luck in finding him. That was 10 years ago, Naruto thought as he sighed again as he contemplated on what to do. So far the scroll had stated that they would like an alliance to combat the Akatsuki and Orochimaru. However, in order to make it more persuasive, they even added in how likely they were to attack his own nation once the Elemental Nations were overrun. Now after that subtle message, Naruto had half a mind to refuse the alliance after all his nation was so far away that by the time they arrived, they would be tired and not effective in combat. That, and the barrier that shuts down the chakra in a person's body would render them useless in battle. You see, the world was split into 2 continents, the East and the West. The East became known as the Elemental Nations and the West recently became known as the United Whirlpool Nation. The reason for the division was because during the fight between the Rakudo Sennin and the Jubi unleashed a strange attack that made all the inhabitants in the West lose their chakra and their chakra network. After the battle, people who could use chakra started seeing those who couldn't as inferior, and eventually prejudice started to grow. Only the Shodem Hokage, the Senju clan and the Uzumaki clan saw them as regular people, but eventually it wasn't enough to stop the hatred, so they asked the Shodem to split the land in half and send them far away. After some tough resistance from the Shodem, he eventually agreed. Then using his control over wood, the Shodem split the land in half. His brother Tobirama Senju then used his control over water to push the West far away so that it would be extremely difficult to cross between the two, bordering impossible. In the end it made both of them very tired and had to spend a little while in a hospital to recover from the effort. Back to the present, when Naruto arrived and united the West, he decided to make it better, if not through chakra then technology. The result was absolutely stunning. Buildings made of bricks and metal instead of wood, weapons that made the Yondaime Hokage's Hiraishin look primitive, a navy that dwarfs the wooden boats the East use. Medical facilities were more efficient than even Tsunade. Communications that made the East's shortwave radios became toys that were beaten by kids' walkie-talkies, and overall everyone was happy. Imagine the continent with cities along the edge that faces the East with the suburbs just behind them and the countryside behind them. There was no crime or corruption, all of it wiped out before it could fester and grow. People were supportive of just about everything he did. His title as leader of the United Whirlpool Nation was sort of passed down through the family. But if they were seen as not worthy, then another would be chosen. Once chosen though, they would permanently stay in as leader and no one can remove them, and all the decisions are final, nobody else could defy them. Looking through the pros and cons of the proposition, he saw a chance at gaining something from this. Then he placed the scroll down onto his desk made of oak and glanced around his office. It was painted white and had a kind of government feel to it. At one end of the room was his desk and large leather chair. Large windows behind him showed the view of his nation that he ruled, and also a flag of his nation, which was white with the Uzumaki clan symbol in the center. In front of him were 2 leather couches that were perpendicular to his desk with a small table between them. On the other end of the room was the only door that the room had. Looking back on his life, he absently thought back to the day he was exiled after he had successfully completed his mission to bring back his old teammate, Sasuke Uchiha. Flashback. Naruto sat in a chair in the middle of Konoha's council room. After being healed of his wounds, he was curious as to why he was here. He had already filed his report away, so why be summoned here, and specifically only him? Wouldn't Shikamaru be a better choice because of his status as the leader at the time? Looking around, he noticed the civilian council were looking smug, whilst the Shinobi council and the Hokage were looking sad. Okay, not a good sign, he thought. Whatever was going on, it wouldn't end well for him, that was a definite. An elderly man wrapped in bandages, Danzo Shimura his name was, then stood up and addressed the Uzumaki. Naruto Uzumaki. Due to inflicting a nearly fatal injury to your target Sasuke Uchiha, we have decided that you be banished and that all that connects you to Konoha is stripped from you. In addition to this, your ability to form hand seals will be taken away from you, as well as all of your possessions and finance will be confiscated and given to Sasuke Uchiha as compensation. He stated smugly as Naruto was given chakra-absorbing handcuffs and then dragged out of the room before he could even comprehend or object to what had happened. Time skip. Next day. It was the evening for when his banishment was scheduled, and during that time he had time to think about what had happened to him. He had completed his mission and had almost gotten killed by someone he thought was his brother in bond. Turns out that it had all been a ploy so that he could gain the Mangekyo Sharingan, and that he never really thought as Naruto as a brother, only as a tool to further his ambition to kill his brother. It was then that he also realized that his so-called crush Sakura Haruno had only used his feelings for her in order to get what she wanted, even if it meant him sacrificing himself. Safe to say his crush for the pink-haired banshee stopped there and had no intention of returning. Soon, though, he received numerous visits from certain people. Almost the entire Konoha 12, now 11, came down and berated him for being a dobi. Sasuke even punched him in the chest for good measure. Sakura punched him in the head and called him a failure. Both Hinata and Neji gave him some juken blows that were painful but not lethal. Ino kicked him when he was on the floor. Kiba had Akamaru urinate on him, and Tenten cut him with some of her kunai. The only ones of the Konoha 11 to not turn up were Choji, Shikamaru, Lee and Shino. Choji was too kind to blame him for anything. Shikamaru was too smart to be bought into it. Lee just didn't like hitting people who couldn't fight back, especially when said person was a dobi like him. And Shino was also too smart to be brought into it. By the end, Naruto was still very much alive but in pain and smelling like urine. His suffering hadn't finished there though, as his sensei, Kakashi Hatake, came down and scolded him for hurting his teammate. He didn't even care to notice the state of his student before he declared that he was no longer a student of his, that if he ever said he was a student of his then he would deny it, and walked away from the broken boy before he could even say a thing. After a couple of hours it was time for his banishment, and he was roughly grabbed and dragged through the village. Along the way he was greeted with jeers and insults from villagers, Shinobi and his peers. Then one of the villagers became more bold by throwing a tomato at his head, and then more joined in. When they reached the gates he was covered in all kinds of rotten food. They then had Danzo apply the seal to his arms to prevent him from forming the hand seals for jutsu, and just before he left he glanced back to notice the seldom looks from Tsunade, Shizune, Iruka, Shino, Shikamaru, Choji, Lee, Asuma, Gai, Kurenai, Anko Mitarashi, Konohamaru, Oden, Moegi, Tuchi and Ayame. From that alone he knew who were friend and who were foe. He then ran as fast as he could away from the village, with many people cheering as his form disappeared from sight down the paved road. End flashback. Half a year later he had been reversed summoned by the Toad Elders Fukasaku and Shima to ask him why he hadn't summoned any of them in such a long time. After he explained to them about his banishment, resulting with some very angry Toad Elders, he asked them to cancel his contract with them so that he couldn't be found by Konoha easily if they wanted to hunt him down for any non-reasonable excuses. They had been sad to realize the logic but accepted it, even though they asked if he could meet the Great Toad Sage as a goodbye. The Great Toad Sage sighed when he was told about the cancellation, though he did say that he somewhat predicted it would happen. His vision had said that something would happen to one of their summoners that would affect them greatly, and told him about the child of the prophecy. He even let a small tear out but accepted it as well, though he said that as a parting gift they would teach him senjutsu to combat his lack of hand seals. At the end of the training he had mastered senjutsu and learned sealing as well. He had tried using his knowledge to remove the seal that prevented his use of hand seals but discovered something horrible. The seal used hadn't been the standard one used on people who were banished. Instead, this one destroyed his ability to use hand seals completely, so that meant he could forever no longer use hand seals and would have to rely on other ways to compensate for it. Namely weapons, fuinjutsu and taijutsu. Before he set off again, the toads gave him the key to his seal that held the Kyuubi, telling him that it was his since it wouldn't be safe with them, as Jiraiya could take it with him at any time and that he could use it to reverse summon him as well if he couldn't do it via toads. Remember, Jiraiya was not mentioned in the flashback, meaning nobody knows his reaction to Naruto's banishment yet. Soon after that he saved Yugito ni, Nibi's container, and Fu, Nanabi's container, from both the Akatsuki and her own village respectively. They then traveled together and became very close. 5 years after his banishment they became a couple, with Yugito and Fu becoming Naruto's girlfriends. Another year later they married and decided to go to the west to get away from the hidden villages and the Akatsuki. On their arrival the place was just as conflicted as the East, but this changed as they traveled across it, helping people along the way. Eventually they united the continent and the United Whirlpool Nation was born. Naruto gained the title Azukage and his two second-in-commands were his wives Yugito and Fu, who became well favored by everyone. The three also became the only chakra users that the West respected. Now with this alliance I could demand for my clan's heritage back that was stolen by the Fire Daimyo. Naruto thought with a scowl in place. Now some would think he was talking about Minato Namikaze, his father, but he was actually talking about his mother, Kushina Uzumaki. You see, when Uzushiogakure was destroyed by a combined effort of Iwa and Kumo, the Land of Fire's daimyo came in and claimed the land as his own without any consent from the survivors and threatened all of them with his large army of samurais that forced the survivors to flee. The reason his mother went to Konoha was because she thought she could get help from the Sandaime to stop the daimyo. Her plea was left unanswered as the Sandaime didn't want to risk a civil war that could be taken advantage of by the other nations, but stayed in Konoha as a necessity. Then, due to her being the only Uzumaki in Konoha other than Mito Uzumaki, she had to become the second Jinchuriki to the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Later on she fell in love with Minato when he saved her from Kumo Nin, who wanted her for her special chakra that could subdue a Biju, and soon fell pregnant with Naruto. Then on the day of his birth the Kyuubi was ripped out of Kushina by Madara Uchiha and his father was forced to seal it inside of him when it was obvious the Kyuubi wouldn't stop rampaging even after the genjutsu on it had been released. Naruto wanted to take back what was his, especially since it was taken by someone who had no rights to it in the first place, but he wanted to do it without putting his nation at risk. The country had only been around for 4 years and some were still affected by the violence that existed before them. He didn't want to cause harm to his country because of him being selfish, no matter how many times he could be. Onto why he didn't want his father's inheritance was because there was no longer any to be claimed. Reason being, his father had placed a blood and time seal on the inheritance that prevented people from touching it without Naruto's blood, and if it wasn't done by the time he was 18 then the seal would destroy his inheritance to prevent anyone else from getting their hands on his jutsu. The reason why he knew about his parents without being told by anyone who knew at the time was because his own parents had told him when he tried to control the Kyuubi. They told him everything from his inheritance to the events that led to the Kyuubi's attack. At first he was angry at his father for the problems the Kyuubi gave him and even said that he wouldn't take the Namikaze name, but he did understand why he did it and would say he was his son. The only problem was that he would be taking on his Uzumaki side of the family as he had been brought up on the name Uzumaki and that the Namikaze inheritance had been destroyed by the time blood seal on it too soon for him to do anything about it. His father had been sad that he couldn't pass on his Hiraishin jutsu to him but admitted it was for the best because it wouldn't do good if someone like Sasuke Uchiha got his hands on it. His mother though was ecstatic that her son would be following in her footsteps by specializing in weapons and fuinjutsu. She also told him that if he wanted to learn how to use her chakra chains then he would need to find the ruins of Uzushiogakure and locate the scroll she hid that also contained her other techniques. After defeating the Kyuubi and gaining full control over his chakra, he said goodbye to his parents, which included being hugged by both of his parents, and they left him with tears in his eyes when they told him that they were proud of him and that they would always love him no matter what. They then disappeared and it was then that he started creating a friendship with Kyuubi, who he discovered was called Kurama, and made his conditions more hospitable in the seal. Sighing again, he pressed the intercom to his wives and said, "Yugito-chan, Fu-chan, can you come here please?" "Sure, Naruto-kun." 10 minutes later his door opened and in stepped his two wives. Yugito wore dark blue jeans with a picture of a pink cat paw at the bottom of her right leg, white trainers, a white t-shirt that covered her C-cup breasts and had styled her hair in a bandaged tail that went down to the small of her back. Also on her were various exercise equipment for monitoring oneself, i.e. heart rate monitor and a watch. Following her was Fu, who wore similar to Yugito except it had a butterfly on her jeans and she wore a red t-shirt that covered her C-cup breasts. Other than that though they wore exactly the same. I am not going to talk about facial features. If you don't know, look it up. What did you want to talk about, Naruto-kun? Yugito asked as they both swayed slightly. Throwing the scroll to them, to which Fu caught, they opened it to read the contents. A series of emotions played across their faces, most notably confusion, coldness, then finally anger. Throwing the scroll back to him, Fu told him what they felt about the alliance. How dare they try to involve us into their war, and instead of making us worried they should have just come clean and say that they need our help badly, Fu stated loudly. Yeah, after everything that they have done to innocent people they dare say that they are justifiable. Especially to Jinchuriki. They treated us like vermin. In fact only Killer Bee got any kind of recognition and that only happened when he was in his late 30s. Kumo was under attack and he almost died in the process, Yugito added. Running a hand through his still spiky blonde hair he replied with a sigh, Yeah, I know, but there are still people who are being harmed because of Madara and Orochimaru, and to be honest, I would rather choose the lesser of the two evils here. The hidden villages may have hurt innocent lives as well, but most of that I know was done unintentional. The only time that didn't happen was with this containers specifically and not everyone in general. Both Yugito and Fu's expression softened at that. Despite the harm done to him by Konoha, he was still willing to ally with them if it meant the safety of innocent people. It was one of those qualities that made people open up to him or try to befriend him. What Konoha had done was throw away a diamond in the rough, and in the end what was Konoha's loss became the West's gain. Thinking over it a little more, they looked at each other for a moment before nodding back to him, to which he pressed a different button on the intercom that connected him to the communications department. Fuki-san, can you please send a message to Konoha to tell them that I will meet them in the other cages about an alliance at the Naha port, AN. That is an actual in Japan. If you were wondering, in Kirigakure 2 days from now. Also inform them the reason why the Naha port was chosen was because of the amount of space needed for our arrival. Naruto said as he took his finger off the button. A second later he heard a female's voice reply back. Yes, Azukage-sama, right away. The intercom then went silent. After that was over, he walked over towards his wives and gave them both a kiss on the lips before flashing to their shared room in the Azukage's mansion. For that night the mansion of the Azukage was loud with moans and sounds of flesh smacking flesh. 1 day later in Konoha, Tsunade sat behind her desk in the Hokage Tower in worry as she held the letter that had arrived from the UWN, shortened version of United Whirlpool Nation, that morning. Standing in the room with her were the other 4 cages. Mei Terumi the Mizukage, Onoki the Tsuchikage, Gaara no Sabaku the Case Cage. Finally there was the Raikage. Standing with them also was Mifune the samurai leader of the Land of Iron and representative of the smaller hidden villages that couldn't have a cage. Looking at the letter in front of them on the desk, they studied it, and if they were honest, it looked weird to them. Instead of a sealed scroll, they got a light brown, rectangular envelope that was sealed on the back. The address read, Tsunade Senju, Hokage Tower, Konohagakure Elemental Nations. Then in the top right-hand corner was a blue stamp with a white swirl in the center. Looking to her fellow cages in confusion, she asked them what was on their mind. Well, it seems that they have started using alternate means of communication, but let's see what they sent back. Mei offered, receiving numerous nods the room's other occupants. Turning over the letter and breaking the seal, Tsunade took out the reply and read it aloud for everyone to hear it. Dear leaders of the elemental nations, I have recently received your letter containing the want for an alliance, and I must say it was a shock to say the least. I have given it consideration and have decided that an alliance may be possible if we talked face to face, so I will meet all of you at the Naha port in Kirigakure tomorrow in the evening. The reason for this is because of the space needed for our arrival. Also, I will be bringing some guards with me for protection, so feel free to bring some along as well. On a more serious note, please do not send any ninja through unauthorized, or it will be taken as an act of aggression on your side and an alliance will be impossible. Yours sincerely, N.U. Uzukage of the United Whirlpool Nation. Just below that was another swirl, only red instead of white. I have seen that swirl before. Onoki muttered as he saw a look of recognition appear on the faces of the Raikage and Hokage as well, though the reason was different. That's the symbol of Konoha. Who does he think he is using our symbol? When he comes here, I should demand he remove it and pay compensation to us for forgery. Tsunade ranted until she was interrupted by a cough from the Raikage and the Tsuchikage. Actually, Tsunade don't know, it is the other way round. He said as he saw Tsunade raise an eyebrow in confusion. Seeing his reluctance to continue because of his predecessor's mistakes, Onoki decided to pick up from there. You see, Tsunade don't know that symbol originally came from the Uzumaki clan in Uzushiogakure. Due to their close connection with the Senju clan, the Uzumaki clan gave permission to Konoha to use their symbol as a sign of friendship. The symbol is now shown on the leaf headbands and on the back of the Chunin and Jonin flak vests. Also, the last initial of his name is U. This could mean Uzumaki. So whoever this NU is, they could very well have all rights to the symbol, even retire it if they want to. The reason why Raikage Dono here is reluctant to continue is because during the Third Shinobi War, Kumo tried to kidnap an Uzumaki but was foiled by the Yondaime Hokage, who was a Chunin. Was he a Chunin at the time? At the time. Onoki finished as he saw the embarrassed blush that the Hokage was now adorning. It shouldn't have been news to her, especially since she was the Hokage and a Senju to boot. It was then that Tsunade realized how important the Uzumaki were to Konoha's founding. Without them, the Senju and Uchiha would have never found a neutral country to negotiate in and would have kept on fighting. How when Madara first used the Kyuubi to attack Konoha Mito Uzumaki, her own grandmother, sealed it within herself to protect them. Then the abuse that one Naruto Uzumaki suffered at the hands of a village that prides itself on his symbol. Finally, the fact that the academy didn't teach anything about the Uzumaki clan was the salt added to the injury. Konoha had taken everything that belonged to the Uzumaki clan, yet gave nothing in return, claimed what was the Uzumaki's as their own and abused the last of its members. It was one of the most awful betrayals that could be committed in the elemental nations. How is he supposed to get there the next day? It took 3 days for the scroll to reach him. How is he going to cross the sea that splits the east and west apart? It's nearly impossible for us to cross it. May stated, wanting to get back to the topic at hand. Shaking her head to clear her thoughts, she made a mental note to right the wrongs Konoha has made. Starting with the Uzumaki clan. I don't know, maybe they'll surprise us again. For now though, I think it best that we retire for the day and we all should meet at the Naha port tomorrow evening, as it said in the reply. Mifune said as he bowed in respect and left along with the other cages. After bidding the other leaders goodbye, she looked at current Jonins to decide who were best to bring along. Ichiraku Ramen Stand. The stand was unusually quiet as the customers ate their food in silence. Before Naruto's banishment, this place used to be filled with laughter from friends and family. After his banishment, it became as quiet as a ghost town. When they got the news, Tucci threw out anybody who insulted his favorite customer, and his daughter Iyame had locked herself in her room and didn't come out for a whole day. Apparently she had had a small crush on the blonde but didn't do anything because of his crush on Sakura at the time. Afterwards she was cold to all of the Konoha 11 who badmouthed or had a hand in Naruto's suffering. Inside the bar, sitting on the bar stools to the ramen stand, were Hinata and Neji Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka and his partner Akamaru, Ino Yamanaka and Tenten. All of them had depressed auras about them as they constantly reminded themselves of the pain they had caused to Naruto just before he was banished, since today would be the 10-year anniversary that it occurred. I still can't forgive myself for abusing him like that. I mean, we all thought that Naruto had almost killed the Teme when we caught word of how badly wounded he was. Not once did we think that Naruto himself would be wounded, Kiba said, with Akamaru whining in agreement. I know, and then when Tsunade called us to ask us about his condition before leaving. Sob, we told her and then said we were glad we did it. Sob, Hinata sobbed as she couldn't get rid of the look of betrayal from the blonde when she and the others had delivered their punishment. Neji rubbed the back of his cousin as she sobbed with her back hunched. Truth be told, if anyone suffered the most out of them, it was Hinata. The girl had a huge crush on Naruto since the academy and didn't have the courage to ask him out. Now she most likely never will have a chance with him, since despite Naruto giving her confidence at the Chunin exams, she didn't return it. Instead she, along with himself, used a painful but non-lethal Juken strike to slowly torture him along with the others. In fact, when Iyame and Tucci heard about their involvement, they banned them along with Sakura and Sasuke from stepping foot in the stand. Out of the whole Konoha 11 at the time, only Shikamaru, Shino, Shoji and Lee were still allowed to eat there. Eventually, after many apologies and begging, Hinata, Neji, Kiba, Ino and Tenten were allowed back into the stand but were now treated with indifference until Naruto said otherwise. That in itself was unlikely to happen since he wasn't allowed in the village anymore. Thinking about Naruto made them recollect the meeting they had with Tsunade just after Naruto's banishment. Flashback. After Naruto had been forced to leave, Tsunade called all of the Rookie 9 and Team Guy and their sensei to appear in her office to discuss the Sasuke retrieval mission. Which brings us to the now filled up Hokage's office. Tsunade herself sat behind her desk, with her elbows leaning on the desk, her fingers interlocked, that consequently hid her mouth slightly and had a serious look about her. In front of her stood the, now, Konoha 11 with their sensei behind them respectively. On her far left were Team Guy, Team 8 on her close left, Team 7 on her close right and Team 10 on her far right. Looking at each team briefly, she decided it was time to begin the meeting. Okay, as you all know, just minutes ago Naruto Uzumaki was banished for hurting Sasuke Uchiha on the retrieval mission that finished recently. Now before Naruto was put in a holding cell he was perfectly healthy and fit. Now the thing was, when he was being escorted to the gates I noticed several things. Firstly, he had his tenketsu in his stomach closed off, that can very painful. Secondly, he had bruising around his chest area from a punch or kick, as well as similar bruising to his head. Thirdly, he had multiple scars on his arms from what looked like kunai wounds. Lastly, he smelled of dog urine when he walked by me. Now can anyone here tell me why he was in that condition when you were the last ones to see him in his cell? She questioned them in a tone that said she knew who did it and just wanted them to deny it. Sasuke snorted by saying, "Yeah, we did it. I punched him in chest, Sakura the head and Ino kicked him when he fell to the ground. Hinata and Neji closed his tenketsu and Tenten cut him up with her kunai. What does it matter though? After all, he did deserve it for almost killing me." This shocked Tsunade, even more so when said Shinobi nodded their heads in agreement. Raising her eyebrow, she decided to get more information. And didn't they stop to think that Naruto had been hurt as well? She questioned as the previously mentioned people looked confused at what she meant. However, this time it was Shikamaru who answered. Hokage-sama. I thought there was more to it along with Choji, Shino and Lee. So we went to Shizune to ask about his injuries. Naruto was already in a prison cell at the time. After we found out about his injuries we ran as fast as we could to stop the others, but it was too late as they had already tortured and visiting hours had ended with them. Shikamaru finished explaining as those who didn't know about Naruto's condition widened their eyes at the revelation. All but one, that is. Oh please, what could the Dobi have had suffered at my hands when he showed a Rasengan into my chest that burned away my skin? Sasuke stated with a snobbish tone. How about a punctured lung from a Chidori? Tsunade countered as everyone's, except for those who already knew, and Sasuke and Sakura, eyes widened in horror at the realization of what they had done to the blonde ex-shinobi. They had jumped to conclusions without getting the full story from both sides. Kakashi felt like he was just as bad as the villagers who had abused Naruto because of the Kyuubi. It was worse because it had been his jutsu that Sasuke had used to force Naruto to use the Rasengan, and then he had the audacity to scold Naruto that badly. I mean, he thought he told Sasuke to not use that jutsu on comrades, but it seemed that he didn't listen and Naruto paid the price for it. In more ways than one. Minato-sensei, Kushina Nichan. I'm a horrible person. I took everything you taught me and threw it out the window. Same with Obito. He said that comrades who abandon others are worse than trash, and I did exactly that with Naruto. I failed you all. Kakashi inwardly sobbed. On the outside only a lone tear fell out of his exposed eye as well as his body started shaking slightly. Quickly, before anyone could talk to him, he shunshined to his apartment where he proceeded to cry himself to unconsciousness. When Kakashi shunshined, everyone, minus Tsunade and surprisingly the remaining Jonin-sensei, wondered why the copycat nin disappeared. Tsunade looked towards the Jonin-sensei and noticed that they too had come to the same conclusion, that Kakashi must have done something to Naruto as well, the genin, but not physical. Once a moment had passed, the genin remembered how each one of them slowly tormented the blonde and the look of betrayal and extreme sadness in his eyes as they stabbed a piece of his soul with every second of their punishment. Tenten, Ino and Hinata dropped to the floor sobbing and crying at the pain they caused unnecessarily to one of their friends that could very well have totally ended their ties with him. Neji, Kiba and Akamaru bowed their heads in shame as they felt the glaring gazes of their sensei on their backs. Shikamaru, Choji, Shino and Lee just looked at their comrades get swallowed up by their shame. To be honest, they didn't want them to suffer, but they needed to learn the lessons of think before acting and that actions have consequences. They were disgusted though when Sasuke smirked in his usual arrogant way. So I did more damage because my jutsu was stronger. Shows the Dobi was nothing more than that. That's where you're wrong, Uchiha. Tsunade said, cutting off the raven-haired nin. Seeing this caused the Uchiha to a confused and angry expression that made Tsunade give a small grin in triumph. You see, Uchiha, at one point in the past Jiraiya told me of when he and Kakashi did the same thing. The outcome was that Kakashi had the same wound as you, and Jiraiya told me that he had to hold back or it would have killed Kakashi. Therefore Naruto held back in order to not kill you so that he could bring you back alive. Tsunade finished as both Sasuke and Sakura scowled at the news. Sakura was about to yell something but was stopped by the glare and killing intent, being directed at her from the busty blonde cage. Okay, now that that has been taken care of, I must issue punishments to some of you because of your reckless and violent actions. Naruto was inside a prison cell, and unless being interrogated, all prisoners must not be subject to verbal or physical pain. You all did both, therefore your punishment will be no new training from anybody, clans and family included. You may though train in what you already know. Next, you will only take D-ranked missions for the next 6 months and will not be allowed to take part in the Chunin exams that also will take place in 6 months. This will apply to Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, Hinata Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka along with Akamaru, Neji Hyuga and Tenten. Kakashi Hitaki will be given his punishment next time I summon him. In the meantime, Shino Aburame, Shoji Akamichi and Rock Lee will form a temporary team to enter the Chunin exams if their sensei are willing to agree at the time. Dismissed. Tsunade informed everyone in an official tone as the Jonins vanished via Shunshin and the Genin and the newly promoted Chunin walked out the door. End flashback. The next day they had heard that the elders of the council had barged into the Hokage's office and demanded that the Uchiha be pardoned of his punishment. The Hokage's response was to be thrown out of her office by herself and told in a cold tone to not just barge into her office like they owned the place. She also added that she would not lift the Uchiha's punishment no matter what they said or did. From there on they had started to see how pampered and arrogant the Uchiha was. Later on they heard that Kakashi had been punished by being forbidden from reading his Icha Icha series for 6 months, and he would be given many other punishments if he was even late by 1 minute to any meeting for the same period of time. Many of the Konoha 11 thought it was unfair, but they discovered that Kakashi had only verbally abused Naruto, not physically, and so couldn't be punished as severely as them. What really was eventful was when we found out about the Kyuubi and his heritage when Jiraiya-sama stormed into Tsunade-sama's office when he heard the news of Naruto banishment. Neji added as he remembered how pissed the Sannin was when he arrived. It had been 1 year since Naruto's banishment, and the Konoha 11 and the Konohamaru Corps had just finished a joint D-rank mission when the man all but blasted the doors off their hinges and then proceeded to shout out why Naruto's name had been erased from the Toad contract and how could she had let Naruto's banishment happen. She replied that she couldn't control the decision made when even the Hyuga clan supported the motion. Jiraiya had then yelled out how Naruto was now a target for Akatsuki. In his haste he had forgotten that the Konoha 11 had been present, and after being pressured by them, they eventually broke and told them about the Kyuubi being sealed inside of him since birth. All of the Konoha 11, minus Sasuke and Sakura, and the Konohamaru Corps were shocked at the news and soon had a newfound respect for Naruto when they remembered how badly his mission records were. Soon though it dawned on them that some of them were just as bad as the villagers since they did exactly the same thing to him when he was being held in a prison cell. Sasuke and Sakura though had believed that he was the Kyuubi itself and continued to badmouth him. Soon Sakura made a comment about how his parents were likely a drunk and a prostitute. She had then been violently slammed against wall by an angry Toad sage who yelled out his parents were great ninja. This had raised questions from everyone, except Tsunade, about how he knew Naruto's parents when nobody else did. He then couldn't avoid it and told them that his parents were the Yondaime Hokage and the Chichiyo no Habanero. The reactions were mixed. Sakura and Sasuke denied it, saying that they were geniuses and he was Adobe. The others though saw the connections that made him reflect the two people. He had the same blue eyes and spiky hair of the Yondaime, but had the facial structure and personality of the Chichiyo no Habanero, plus the fact it was known that Kushina was Minato's wife and that her name was Uzumaki. It made all of them even more ashamed of themselves. The Genins and Kakashi because they realized how they had just spat on their heroes' legacies. The Kunoichi all looked up to Kushina and the Shinobi had all adored the Yondaime. Tenten had then asked why he had failed 3 times, to which Tsunade responded that the first 2 times he was sabotaged to fail and that the Sandaime hadn't picked up on. His actual results would have been about average had they not been tempered with, and because he would achieve sometimes in school parents would arrange mobs to beat the boy whenever he did something well. This had then given him the impression that succeeding was bad behavior, so when it came down to their generation it was already too late. He had completely foregone training and nothing Iruka did encourage him to try working hard again. This made many of the Jonin sensei despise themselves as they had assumed that Naruto was a clown that did what he did because he could. Not because he needed to do it for his survival or that he was conditioned to be like that, especially when they heard how he passed and became a genin. Then when the other nations heard about Naruto's banishment they started cutting off ties with us. First was Wave, then Snow, then Tea, and we almost lost Sand as well if it wasn't for Gaara saying that Naruto wouldn't want him to abandon the few people who were nice to him. Though our alliance is greatly strained and even though they will still help us in a war they will not aid us in any way in peacetime. Ino said as they briefly remembered how furious Gaara had been when he got the news of Naruto's banishment. His Sand had nearly on instinct killed the council if it wasn't for his sister, who calmed him down. Gaara then proposed that when Naruto met him again he would allow Temari to marry him since apparently she had had a small crush on the boy as well when the Chunin exams finished. He then also stated how if he was to meet Naruto again then it would be his choice on if he should stay with Konoha or not. It had caused an uproar with the civilian council, but after a burst of ki from the Hokage they promptly shut up. Then when the Yondaime's possessions destroyed themselves and Naruto's heritage was fully revealed, the council tried to bring him back, but because he cut off his ties to the Toads we can't find him. Not that I blame him. Ino continued until the rest of them had finished eating. Yeah, well, now you know to get the whole story, instead of doing something based on only one side and not looking further into it. Tucci stated passively as he took their now empty bowls of ramen and gave them the bill for the food. Sighing the Chunins and Jonin, Neji is the only Jonin along with Shino, Shikamaru, Temari and Kankuro, paid for their meals and left the stand with gloom looks. As they pushed the curtains aside to walk out into the street they saw a thoughtful Kakashi walking past them and surprisingly without his erotic novels that Jiraiya wrote. The man himself had his head tilted to look at the floor holding his chin in his left hand and his other hand in his pocket as he walked through the crowd. Kakashi-sensei, what is it that has caused you to be seen without your porn? They not have your favorite Icha-Icha? Kiba joked in the hopes of lifting everyone's spirits up and get back to the present instead of dwindling on the past. Said Jonin looked at them and his exposed eye closed in what people could only interpret a smile. Hi there Kiba, and no, that is not the reason. Apparently the cages are trying to ally with the United Whirlpool Nation, and it would appear that Guy and I have been selected to be Tsunade-sama's guards for the meeting. The other cages and the representative of the minor nations will also have 2 guards with them. Kakashi informed them. The response he got were many confused expressions being directed his way. Kiba though was the one to ask the question that was won their mind. What? Why do we need the help of a country that can't even use chakra? I mean, they won't be of much help since they can't even perform jutsu, right? Lee may not be able to use chakra, but he could at least use the 8 inner gates, whereas those of the West can't. The thing though, Kiba, is that our leaders have come up with a hypothesis that the West have developed in a way we might not have imagined. An example of this would be that the cages received the UWN's reply to their scroll today, and that it stated that it had been sent the day before. That kind of journey would normally take 3 days to arrive, but they did it in a third of the time. Sigh. Well, I have to get ready to meet the Hokage at the gates tomorrow morning, so, ya-ne. Kakashi replied as he continued walking towards his apartment to prepare for the imminent meeting between the leaders of the elemental nations and the leader of the United Whirlpool Nation. The shinobi and villagers who had heard what the Jonin had said began to worry, as they knew that the war against the Akatsuki was going bad. They just didn't know it was that bad. Meanwhile, with the Akatsuki, it would appear that the Shinobi Alliance have turned to the west for help. Madara Uchiha said as he glanced at the figures that resided with him in the cave that contained the statue that held the biju that they had collected. Over time their numbers had diminished to him: Zetsu, Deidara, Sasori and their temporary ally Orochimaru. Itachi Uchiha had been killed by himself when he tried to kill him with his back turned. It turned out that the man had never truly betrayed Konoha and had been ordered to massacre the Uchiha clan and then join their organization in order to keep track of them. Kisame Hoshigaki had been killed when he tried to take on the Hachibi's Jinchuriki. The man had been able to defeat him, but not before falling unconscious and becoming easy for Madara to come and take him without resistance. Kakazu and Hidan had been killed by the Nibi's Jinchuriki and an unknown man that they still hadn't identified. The reason why the zombie brothers were dead when people thought they couldn't die was because their bodies were completely obliterated so that nothing was left. Pain, or Nagato as he was called, and Konan had been killed by Madara himself when he decided that he wanted one of his Rinnegan eyes. The pair had put up a tough fight that had even left Madara wounded for weeks before he fully recovered, only to end up with destroyed Rinnegan eyes that were useless to him. We should easily beat them, They can't even use chakra, Deidara boasted as he flexed the mouths on his hands. Shut up, Deidara. You shouldn't judge people on appearances alone, Sasori advised as the others nodded along with him in agreement. Ku. I'll have my spies work on their strengths and we will see if they're a threat. After all, I don't want any more extra obstacles between me and Sasuke-kun. Orochimaru hissed with a smirk in place as he summoned Kabuto to send a message to his spies. No matter, Zetsu, I want you to do the same, as I don't trust the snake to give us all the information he acquires, Madara stated. As you wish, Zetsu replied as he sank into the ground, vanishing from view. Time skip. Morning, Konoha. Take care and good luck, Tsunade-sama. Hinata shouted as her and the other shinobi and villagers stood at the gate to bid her goodbye. I will, Hinata. Take care everyone, we should be back the next day or the day after. Tsunade replied as she, Guy and Kakashi waved farewell and started their trip to the Naha port in Kirigakure. Iwa. Kuretsuchi-sama, look after Tsuchikage-sama. An Iwa villager shouted as said person grinned and waved in response. She and Akatsuchi were her grandfather's bodyguards for the meeting and were just about to set off. If the Tsuchikage's back hadn't thrown itself out when he tried pick up a backpack. Ow. Damn this traitorous back of mine. Told ya you were too old to have the hat. Maybe you should hand it over to me now while we have the chance. Kuretsuchi joked as she only received a death glare from the Tsuchikage. HMPH. Onoki replied before all 3 used their ability to fly to get to the Naha port on time for the meeting, with the cheers, and in some cases laughing, of the villagers and shinobi behind them. Kiri. Make sure you take care of Mei-sama, Aoi, Shojiro. The mist shinobi shouted as they and the other villagers gave similar words of encouragement. No worries. By the time we come back the Alliance, hopefully we will have another ally to help us in our struggle, Mei announced as her villagers cheered in response. Let's go. We should be the first to arrive considering the port is in our nation, Mei said as the trio made their way past the gates to their village. Hi, Mei-sama. A nervous Chojiro said as he received a whack to the back of his head from Aoi. HMPH, in my time men didn't break down like that. Break. Mei thought as a dark aura started to appear around her. I mean, what happens when you are up and in an engagement with the enemy? Up. Engagement. Mei continued to think. her dark aura becoming more dense. Turning to Aoi and closing her only visible her, she gave him a sickly sweet smile as she said in an equally toned voice. Aoi. Shut up or I'll kill you. Ah, what did I do wrong? Aoi exasperated as he jumped back a few steps in fright. Kumo. Darui. See, make sure Raikage-sama is safe and keep him in line. Don't want his emotions to get in the way if he screws up. Kami, he almost did during the Gokage summit. Mabui said with amusement in her eyes as she and other villagers and shinobi bid their Raikage luck with gaining another ally. Don't worry, Mabui-san. Raikage-sama will keep his emotions in check. Right, Raikage-sama? C questioned as his companion smirked at the slight sweat the Raikage had when he was questioned. Why, yeah, sure. Clears his throat. Well, come on now, Darui. C, let's go before we are late. He stuttered slightly before recovering and finishing with a conviction in his voice that made many of the others smirk at the Raikage's slip-up in posture from his usually stuck-up personality. Many hours later at the Naha port. The port itself was very large, the docking being large enough to hold a whole street. Problem with this design being that the town in the port being small and compact in order to not use up any more space. Originally it was designed to hold what the elemental nations deemed as deep-sea ships that could not go into the shallows. What they didn't take into account was that there were vessels that were even larger than what they saw as deep-sea ships, and that is exactly what the 5 Cages and Mifune were facing, for in front of them a long way away was a huge ship that was made of metal. They also noticed that it also contained other metal-like things and that it could carry more men than they thought possible. AN. CV-67 aircraft carrier. Oh my. Tsunade stated as she and the other leaders of the alliance could only nod in surprise at how orderly the UWN's forces were. It was then they noticed that a number of differently clothed men boarded the strange metal objects that were resting on the deck of the ship. They then saw the blades on top of the objects start to spin at blinding speeds and, much to their shock, the objects started to fly in their direction. That was a feat that only the Tsuchikage and his top shinobi could perform. As they got closer they heard the chopping noise the objects made and saw the uniforms that, what they could only presume as, the soldiers wore were very odd to them. Imagine Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 US Rangers, desert version. The objects seemed to form a backwards triangle with the two on either side of the middle one further in front. Eventually they felt the force being projected from the rotating blades and had to use their arms to shield themselves from the dust being kicked up. My, what youthful ideas the West have brought, Guy shouted, seemingly unaffected by the force being exerted, though none were surprised given his insane training routine and his specialization in taijutsu. Soon the objects landed, and once the blades started to slow down the soldiers disembarked carrying weird objects, Colt M16A2, from their transports and lined up on either side to form a path perpendicular to the middle transport. AN. Just like in Star Wars 4 when Darth Vader disembarks from his fighter in the Death Star. They then saw 3 figures stand up from the transport in rather unique-looking armor. They're dressed as Raidon from MGS4, including a trenchcoat. Only difference is that Naruto's is black, Yugito's blue and Fu's green. Also, it is entirely removable. They have dual Fabrique Nationale 57 on their sides and they each have a Colt M4A1 SOP-mod strapped to their back. Naruto has a shotgun attachment, Yugito has a foregrip and Fu has a grenade launcher. All 3 also have a cog scopes. Add in the usual daggers and serrated sword and that's their outfit completed. Once the leaders got a clear sight at the 3 they could only stare with open mouths in shock. They were none other than the only Jinchuriki that Madara still did not possess yet. Tsunade, Kakashi, Guy, A. Darui and C were more affected than the others. Especially when they saw the sunny blonde hair of Naruto and the pale blonde hair of Yugito. AN. Fu's leader Shibuki can't be present as he is represented by Mifune. Walking down past his soldiers, who saluted him as he passed, Naruto made his way to the shocked leaders and he and his wives couldn't help but smirk at the frozen looks that were plastered on the leaders of the elemental nations' faces. Once he was in front of Tsunade he gave a small chuckle that made her pay attention to him specifically rather than absently. Well, Obasan, it appears that you are in need of some help. Why don't we find a better place to talk about this alliance that you and the others want? No, it can't be, Tsunade thought as she looked at the armored man in front of her. The way he looked showed an aura of calmness, yet it showed authority and power beyond any she had seen before. Not even the Shodaime, Nadaime, her own sensei the Sandaime or the Yondaime commanded such an environment that made her and the other leaders feel insignificant. Soon the chopping noise made by the strange transportation slowed down and eventually ceased altogether. It was then that everyone got a better look at their newcomers. Naruto. A panic-stricken Kakashi thought as his only visible eye widened in disbelief as he gazed at the student he so willing cast off, even though he didn't teach said student enough to be considered his sensei to begin with. Honestly, a lecture on teamwork, that even he didn't stand by, and a small description of tree walking, that he didn't bother to help explaining to those who couldn't understand, do not count as teaching. Then a lot of emotions started to appear on his expression, the two most prominent ones being happiness and nervousness. Happiness from finding the boy, no man, after worrying about him for over a decade, of his whereabouts, and nervousness because he was worried of Naruto's reaction to him and Konoha after everything they had done to him. Guy was on similar thoughts but was not as worried as Kakashi was on how Naruto would react to him personally because, unlike his rival, he never did anything to him in the past to create any ill will between the two. Yugito. The group heard a shout as all eyes turned towards the other females who were equally as armored as the blonde X-Leaf Shinobi, though their coats were a different color, Yugito's blue and Fu's green. Upon recognizing them, they discovered the two females were the Jinchurikis to the Nibi and Nanabi, and that their leader was the Jinchuriki to the Kyuubi. The yellow flash. Onoki muttered as he looked at the blonde with a slight fear in his eyes as well as a small sweat running down his forehead. Everyone now looked at him, but their attention was then drawn back to blonde when he gave a small laugh that somehow made the atmosphere less tense. I may look like my father, but I am not him. I'm his son, Naruto Uzumaki, Shodem Azukage of the United Whirlpool Nation and son of Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage, and Kushina Uzumaki, the Chishio no Habanero. Next to me are my second-in-commands and wives Yugito ni Uzumaki and Fu Uzumaki. We came here today to officially begin negotiations between your alliance and my nation. Though there will be demands made and some may not be met, I hope that in the end everyone gains something out of it. Now do you have a room where we could all speak, please? Naruto announced in a kind tone that made the leaders think that so far the relations were going well. Or so they thought. Yes, of course, please follow me. Mifune greeted with a neutral expression. Nodding back, Naruto then turned back towards the soldiers that were still standing in the same position as before. Okay, men, at ease. Your orders are to set up a rendezvous point here and be prepared for immediate extraction. If you see anybody that has either a black cloak with red clouds printed on them or they carry a Hite 8 with a musical note on them, then contact me immediately. Do not attack them unless they attack first, as we are not at war with them. That is what this meeting is about. However, be cautious around them, and if they seem to be heading to our negotiations, then you may engage them as well, but do not prolong the battle. Understood. Naruto ordered and received a clear, "Hi Uzukage-sama," from said soldiers. Turning back to the cages, Naruto followed them into a big building, in which he assumed was the meeting place, with both of his wives following behind him. Negotiations room. The room itself was dark and it had 2 levels to it. On the bottom was a circular table with the insignia of each nation behind a chair on the wall, indicating where each person will seat. Above them were balconies where their bodyguards would stand watch over the proceedings. Once everyone took their seat, their bodyguards were told to go up to the stands. While the elemental nation's ninja climbed with using the tree walking exercise, Yugito and Fu just jumped up to the stands with little to no effort being used. This caused many of the shinobi present to stare wide-eyed. Nobody they knew could do that kind of jump, even with the aid of chakra. Only the use of the Shunshin no Jutsu could match that, but because of the sensitivity of the meeting, nobody was allowed to use nin or genjutsu to avoid others thinking it was the beginning of an attack. What the hell have you been up to, Gaki? Tsunade thought as she noticed that the armor they wore was very light, yet it offered protection from even chakra-enhanced weaponry. As everyone took a seat, Naruto took off his trench coat and laid it on the back of his chair, revealing to everyone his full body armor. In addition to this, he took off his weapons and placed them in front of him on the desk. Once everyone was seated, Naruto took the time to observe his surroundings. Opposite him was Mifune. On his close left was Tsunade, next was A, then Onoki, then back to Mifune, after him was Mei, and then finally Gaara was on his close right. Wow, Gaara made cage. Good for him, at least one us was able to gain the respect they deserved. Naruto thought as he gave a small smile in greeting towards the redhead. Said man smiled as well and nodded his head in respect for his brother that he had dubbed because of what he used to contain and the same burden that Naruto still carried. Mifune then stood up and addressed the table. As I represent all of the minor countries, I will be the one to oversee this meeting and will step in when needed. Please may all participants avoid fighting, as it will cause problems for the Shinobi Alliance in the future. You may begin now. Mifune announced as he sat back down in his chair whilst silence temporarily loomed over the room. While everyone were trying to think of the best way to start the meeting, Naruto was analyzing each cage with his armor and it displayed on his interface. I am talking about those plates that move in front of Raiden's eyes as he fights, all of their known abilities and personality. Gaara no Sabaku, Godem Kazekage and son of the Yondaime Kazekage. Although he has improved himself overall, he still relies too much on his sand, and so as a result he is still weak at Tai and Genjutsu. Plus his ninjutsu is heavily sand-based. Personality-wise, he is still monotone in just about everything that is official and never lets his emotions rule his decision that isn't related to his family. The youngest cage present. Naruto read on his interface as a hologram appeared of Gaara and the text appeared beneath it in a pale blue color. The picture though did not obscure his sight and it didn't affect his posture, so the cages didn't know that he was getting information from them. Inwardly he sniggered when he predicted their reactions. First would be shock from the abilities shown. Second would be anger from the revealing of said information. Third would be demands for the technology so that they could be used against each other in the future. Tsunade Senju, Godem Hokage and granddaughter to both Hashirama Senju and Mito Uzumaki Senju. Medic Nin and is only one of 2 people to know her super strength jutsu, known to kill a person with 1 hit. Known to be the best medic in the elemental nations and has had to suffer the loss of both her lover, Dan Kato, and her brother Nawaki Senju. Has a slightly quick temper that can be taken advantage of. However, she has a deep regret for banishing me and wishing to make it up to me. Mental sigh. Depending on her actions from now on will determine her standing with me. A. Yondaime Reikage and son to the Sandaime Reikage. Only known user of the Raiden no Yoroi that enhances his speed to the point of being second only to Hiraishin and ex-partner to Killer B. Faced my father during the Third Shinobi War and lost but barely. Is known to allow his emotions to rule him at times and was the one to call all the cages together for the first meeting that resulted in the Shinobi Alliance. Onoki, Sandaime Tsuchikage. Only known user of the Dust Release, AN. I would use the actual term for it but it conflicts with Swift Release. That enables the user to manipulate molecules and therefore gives them the ability to disintegrate anything on a molecular level. Only person alive to fight against Madara Uchiha and still live. Has had dealings with Akatsuki in the past. HMPH I respect him for his ability to fight but as a person I do not trust him. He is indirectly a reason that my kind were hunted down like animals as he essentially gave them the finance for their organization. Mei Terumi, Godem Mizukage and leader of the rebel forces that overthrew the Sandaime Mizukage. Known user of the Yoton and only known user of Fuden style of ninjutsu, AN. Do not get that confused with Fuden. Fuden means boil release and Fuden means wind release. She is very neutral when it comes to politics and is known to make good decisions, however has an anger problem when references to her past love life. Rumors say that Akatsuki originated from her nation but our sources say it was a megacure that it came from. Mifune, leader of the samurai nation Tetsu no Kuni, has fought Sanshuo no Hanzo in the past. Is also neutral and doesn't like to be involved in shinobi affairs. Made an exception because the Akatsuki threaten everyone and not just the ninja. Soon Gaara mustered up enough courage to start off the proceedings. If I may be the first to open this discussion. First of all I would like say that we are in greatly need of your help with dealing with both of the Akatsuki and the Hidden Sound Village. What we mainly lack are the manpower, medical and other supplies that have become scarce. We were wondering if you could spare any to help win this war that would surely follow you if it were allowed to spread. I demand that you hand over Yugito to us as she is still a registered kunoichi under Kumo. I already lost B to the Akatsuki, I won't lose her to them as well. He shouted as he stood up in an attempt to be intimidating to the Azukage. Sighing from the predictability of the Reikage, Naruto turned and gave him a deadpan expression. Reikage Dono, as much as I respect you for trying to protect Yugito-chan, then why didn't you send a search party for her when she was attacked by the Akatsuki in the first place? When I found her she was fighting 2 Akatsuki and was close to losing. When I intervened and saved her I asked her if she wanted to go back to Kumo. Her answer was no and added that you probably set her up since apparently you never cared about her. She said that whenever she was mistreated you ignored her, but when B was mistreated you practically beat the offender to a bloody pulp. Then when she went missing my sources told me that you didn't even try to find her, but we have been informed that when B was captured you practically declared that all the other nations were at fault for losing people of our kind. Don't make demands that you are not entitled to. Naruto started off in an even tone but ended up loudly stating the Reikage's fault in the first negotiations. I looked down, finding the floor more interesting at the moment after being verbally assaulted and being correct in each accusations as he sat back down in his chair. Calming down, Naruto turned back towards the other cages and he decided to make his opinion known. Now before anyone interrupts me I would like to make some suggestions. First of all, my soldiers are designed to fight battles and not to go into espionage or spy-related missions. With this in mind I can take care of the main front lines with your ninja in support or using them to do one of 3 things: assassinating, sabotage or information gathering. With me so far? Naruto questioned and receiving nods in response. Alright, since my men do not have a chakra network or use chakra at all they cannot be used for many stealth operations that involve hiding in plain sight. Stealth operations we can do, but if it involves disguising ourselves as the locals then it will not work as it will look suspicious that they could not detect us leaking any chakra at all. Instead they would suspect that we are ninjas who can hide our chakra signature to a very high extent. Then I believe that we can leave the main fighting to your men Azuka's Dono. However, as part of these negotiations I am willing to have that seal we put on you that restricts your ability to form hand seals removed if you could provide us with the medical supplies we need. Tsunade offered as she wanted to repair her somewhat shaky relationship with her fellow blonde. His response was a chuckle that, unlike the laugh near the beginning of the meeting, didn't have any humor in it. Hokage Dono, I know what you are trying to do and I do appreciate it. The problem is that Danzo, many of the leaders scowl at the name, used a different seal than the one you wanted. While it did do its purpose, he also tweaked it so that it permanently stopped my ability to use hand seals. Cue gasps from the female attendants and deeper scowls from the males. Also, because I had had it on for a long period time, it became a part of me and so can't be removed. Normally the seal used would seal my memories of hand seals away so that I couldn't remember how to use them. However, what Danzo did was use a seal that caused me great pain if I made the hand seals with an amount of chakra that exceeded the level set. So in short, I can still form the hand seals without chakra, or I can use jutsu that requires chakra but doesn't require hand seals, such as the Rasengan. Naruto said as he received shocked looks from the other leaders in the room. The cages themselves couldn't help but sneer inwardly at the mention of Danzo. He had caused so many problems for them in the past, the Hokage included. Sending his root out to cause trouble all in the name of Konoha, or to be more specific himself. His belief that shinobi are emotionless tools was very disliked by everyone present and was the reason Sarutobi was chosen as the Sandaime Hokage instead of himself. In recent years he has become more daring in operations, and that because of his old age he has become more delusional, so that he went from just wanting to be Hokage to wanting the whole world to be ruled by Konoha and essentially himself. He had even gone so far as to suggest Konoha betray the alliance with the other nations. Seeing that they were getting off topic, Onoki spoke up to get an answer to a question he had been thinking of since the idea for the alliance came about. Even though we all have had past grievances with Danzo, I question the effectiveness of your nation Azuka's Dono. As far as I know, your forces will not be of much help to us, considering that they cannot use chakra, nor do they have a chakra network. Onoki snorted as the Azuka's stern gaze turned to him. First of all, do not think, for 1 minute, that my nation will be under the command of the cages present, nor their shinobi. Prejudices in the past have caused people in the UWN to be wary of people who can use chakra, even people like Rock Lee who may not be able to use chakra, unless it's taijutsu related, but still has a chakra network. In the face of this, my forces will only answer to shinobi whose orders are approved by my army's counterparts. Any shinobi who tries to force one of my forces to do an order will be considered a threat to my men and killed on sight or captured and put on court-martial. This also means that my army will not stay in any hidden village in the efforts to avoid conflict between allies. No doubt that there will be some fool either in my army or yours that will try to start something. As for their fighting prowess, I propose a challenge. I will face a shinobi or shinobis of your choosing without using chakra. You can even have a Hyuga use their Byakugan to be sure that I am not using chakra, and instead of my using my own gear I will use the standard equipment my men use to show you how efficient they can be. Naruto sternly told the Tsuchikage. The other cages were thinking of possible opponents that would have high a chance of beating him, but before they could speak, Tsunade decided to give a proposition of her own. If I may ask my fellow cages, may I offer the challenge of the entire Konoha 11 facing you Azuka's Dono in one-on-one fights in Konoha's Chunin exam arena? They are all either Tokubetsu Jonin or fully fledged Jonin and are a suitable challenge, especially since a cage is still a powerful opponent even when they deliberately weaken themselves. Tsunade offered as the other leaders considered her solution. In truth, she wanted them to meet to get their problems sorted and off their chests. Back to the thoughts of the cages, Amny thought it was a good idea. After all, the Konoha 11 were known to be a group of very skilled Konoha nin. That, and they were the first generation to pass, with 8 of them being clan heirs, 1 from a civilian councilwoman and 2 being orphans. And that they barely survived their first Chunin exams, with only the Nara being promoted. This confused me greatly in the canon. Naruto and Shikamaru are equally qualified to be Chunin. Shikamaru had the brains but lacked actual strength, and Naruto had plenty of strength but lacked brains, so they both stand on either side of the spectrum. Even then Naruto could still come up with plans on the spot, whereas Shikamaru had to sit and think. That gives the enemy plenty of time to kill him. The only reason it didn't happen was because Tamari hesitated and was confused by his thinking pose. And that officially they had beaten Orochimaru's personal Jonin bodyguards known as the Sound Five, despite the fact that in reality they were mid-Chunin in terms of actual power and skill. Yeah, very powerful. I will accept your idea if the other cages agree. Naruto spoke cheerfully, but his voice seemed to contain anything but that. This was picked up by everyone there, but only the Hokage, her bodyguards, the Kazekage and Naruto's wives knew why. "Oh Naruto, I'm so sorry, I couldn't stop them," Tsunade thought as she bowed her head and allowed her bangs to cover her eyes so as to not show how misty her eyes had become. Up on the balconies. "What a fool I was, and now because of said foolishness I lost my student, though I never taught him anything really significant, and my sensei's son no less," Kakashi thought. Inwardly he was close to being depressed again since he was thinking back on his team's genin days. He was supposed to have taught them how to survive in the world of shinobi. Instead he focused on one student because he thought he owed it to said student's clan and practically left his other two students to fend for themselves. One tried to defect and almost killed his comrade with a jutsu he taught him in the hopes of protecting them. Now he is a spoiled jonin who tries to take what he wants whenever he wants it. Another was a rabid fangirl that always tried to gain the attention his previously mentioned student and still does. The only change was that she now had training in Tsunade's jutsu. I know some people will be angry about the training with Tsunade, but I only really started to change from the canon at the Valley of the End where Naruto wins. So Sakura has already asked for training. As a compromise though I have decided that instead of a fully fledged apprenticeship I have chosen to just some training to make her slightly better. Then finally was his last student. The one he abandoned in his hour of need and had earlier written off as a failure that wouldn't be assigned anything more important than gate guarding, whilst his comrades became either Jonin or Anbu. Now he is no longer his student, hasn't been for 10 years, and is now the leader of a nation that rivals all of the elemental nations put together and has the population's full support. Yep, that can be disheartening for a teacher who was one of the best Jonin in Konoha. Guy saw his companion's imminent depression and thought it best to bring the one-eyed Jonin back to earth. Placing a hand on his shoulder, Guy brought Kakashi's attention to him as the man moved his head to meet the green spandex-clad ninja's calm face staring back at him. As if sensing what Guy was going to say, Kakashi smiled and turned back to the meeting. "Sigh, my eternal rival, if you had listened to my advice from the beginning then you probably wouldn't be seeing this. If only you hadn't been obsessed with honoring Obito's memory then you wouldn't have been blinded to the actions you committed," Guy thought as he remembered the talk he had with Kakashi when he was given Team 7. Flashback. It was a nice summer's day in Konoha and currently Guy and Kakashi were sitting in a barbecue restaurant having breakfast to prepare them for the day. "So my eternal rival, how youthful do you feel about taking on these youthful students of yours?" Guy exuberantly questioned. "Well, Sasuke I'm sure will pass my challenges and I am pretty sure that he will help his teammates pull through," Kakashi nonchalantly replied as he read his orange book. Upon hearing this, Guy's happy expression fell into one of confusion. "Are you sure, my rival?" I read his mental examination reports. All of them state that he despises people trying to work with him. "Oh, I'm sure those are exaggerated. Besides I am more worried about Naruto. The kid's Adobe and can't even make do the Bunshin no Jutsu," Kakashi said, waving off Guy's question. "But he can do Kage Bunshin no Jutsu easily, and with the amount he can make it's no wonder the Bunshin no Jutsu didn't work. Naruto-kun has too much chakra and wasn't provided with any advanced chakra controlling exercises except leaf balancing," Guy retorted. Ma, it doesn't matter. As soon as Sasuke activates his Sharingan I'm going to train him privately so that he can master it and protect his comrades with it," Kakashi answered back to the now slightly frowning Jonin. It was then that Guy realized something. Kakashi was describing Sasuke like he had Naruto's morals. Said morals were the same as his late teammates, Obito Uchiha. It seemed that Kakashi was trying to see him in Sasuke, but the problem was Sasuke was nothing like Obito. Obito was kind and was willing to work with his teammates despite how he felt about them. Sasuke though would kill his teammates the moment they stood between him and his goal to kill Itachi. "My youthful rival, as a word of advice, please move on from Obito's death. Constantly mourning him like this will only cause unneeded problems for you." But before Guy could get in another word, Kakashi had already used Shunshin no Jutsu to travel to the Kia Memorial Stone to mourn his friend for 2 hours before meeting his new team. A team that Guy believed would suffer because of Kakashi's unwillingness to move on. He was right. End flashback. "And now because of your stubbornness your team became the opposite of what they were supposed to be. All teachers want their students to make it as high as possible. You only wanted one to succeed and the other two to stay where they were. However, the one you expected to particularly fail became something beyond that of a simple cage. His title may be a cage but his rule stretches across a land and population that equals all of the elemental nations put together. They support him and are willing to lay down their lives for him. His genius surpasses that of the Yondaime and we didn't see it. Konoha lost its will of fire the moment Naruto was sentenced to be banished," Guy inwardly stated in a rare sense of seriousness. "With the cages. Before we give our decision we would like to know why you seem a little hostile towards the Konoha 11 Azukage Dono," Mei asked Naruto with a raised eyebrow in confusion. It was then that Naruto sighed before changing his mood to one of a kind of sadness that the others recognized as one related to past problems. Folding his hands on one another and leaning on his elbows on the desk so that his mouth was hidden, Naruto responded to the red-haired Mizukage. That is because 10 years ago the Konoha 11 used to be the Konoha 12. Naruto responded, causing the other leaders, minus the Hokage and Kazekage, to look confounded at the blonde. Seeing that they needed a clearer explanation, Naruto continued to talk about his banishment. Think about it, I am the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, and the last time the Kyuubi was spotted was attacking Konoha, where the Yondaime Hokage defeated him, and I turned 26 years old last the 10th of October, which is exactly 26 years since the Kyuubi's attack. I then grew up to become a shinobi of Konoha and graduated at the same time with the Konoha 11. I was placed on Team 7 with Sasuke Uchiha and Sakura Haruno, with Kakashi Hitaki being our Jonin sensei. Time went on until the Uchiha defected from Konoha to Oto, and other members of the Konoha 11 along with me were tasked to bring him back. In the end it was a success when I came back with the Uchiha on my back. However, that was when things changed for the worst for me. I was accused of being too forceful even when it was clear that I was wounded more than the Uchiha. I was sentenced to be banished, and between the time from being sentenced to actually being exiled I was tortured by some of my former comrades because I hurt the Uchiha. Then my own sensei declared that I was never a student of his. Naruto concluded. It was then that his interface showed all of the statistics of each of the Konoha 11 and saw that they hadn't changed at all, just that they were more proficient at their specialities were. An example being Tenten had only become better at weapons with very small improvements in her other areas. As he looked around he saw disappointing glares being sent to the Hokage, who was looking down in shame at how she allowed his torture to happen under her nose. Seeing the disappointing looks, Naruto actually started to sneer at the other cages except for Gaara, who was the only cage not trying to bore his gaze towards the Senju. Don't look at her in that way, you're all responsible for similar transgressions against our kind. The Tsuchikage treats our kind like objects with constant references to them as it, and even helped the Akatsuki by hiring them in the past. The Tsuchikage frowned. The Raikage didn't care if they weren't close to him personally, as shown by his past negligence to my wife before I met her. The Raikage looked down in shame. The Mizukage didn't bother to use the only Byakugan user. She had to check the Sandaime Mizukage and see if he was under a genjutsu, which was proven correct, and could have avoided a civil war altogether. The Mizukage also looked down in self-loathing. So far the only village that seems to have my respect is Suna, and even then I am still cautious of them since they used to treat Gaara the same way as me. Naruto told them with an edge in his voice. It was disgusting with the way they immediately tried to blame someone when they were just as guilty and if not more guilty. After the other cages had regained their composure, the Kazekage decided to speak up. Well then, I would like to officially declare that tomorrow we will go to Konoha, where Azukage Dono will face the Konoha 11 in single combat whilst using only the resources available to his soldiers. Gaara stated as the rest of the table nodded in agreement. What will the stakes be? Naruto said as the others started thinking of possible results. If you fail to beat even one of the Konoha 11, then all the Jinchuriki will be put under our authority and the UWN will also be under our control. Onoki harshly said to Naruto, who scowled deeply at the man in his threatening tone. Kyuubi growled from within Naruto's mind that now resembled a large forest instead of the cage it once was. Calm down, Kurama, he may be a Teme just like the Uchiha, but it wouldn't serve any purpose to kill him now. Naruto inwardly replied to his tenant. In addition, he also heard low growling from his two wives who were thinking similar things along with their Biju. How dare he, even now when he so desperately wants our help, he has the gale to threaten us like that. Kitten, settle down. Naruto-kun has it under control. Don't worry, the Tsuchikage will get what's coming to him later on. That old man, he's going senile. A moment ago he was practically begging for our help, now he is demanding we become his slaves. I know, young one, but don't worry, Naruto will know what to do. He has proven many times that he can do the impossible, and he can do it again here. I agree to the terms, however should I win I want the fire daimyo to give me what should have been mine. Uzushiogakure. The cages were stunned at the demand. It was a rather important area for the elemental nations, rich in materials and minerals worth 2 daimyos. May I ask why you would demand such a thing? He asked in a curious tone. Leaning back in his chair, Naruto fixed the man a stare that made the man shiver inwardly. Apart from the fact that I am an Uzumaki, meaning that Uzushio is mine by birthright, but also the stakes are equal. My country for Uzushio, in fact when looking more closely at it, my united whirlpool nation is much more valuable than Uzushio, so be glad that I am not demanding for more, Naruto replied. Before anyone else could challenge him, Mifune stood up. All right, now that that has been sorted, I would like to end this meeting and that we will meet again in Konoha to evaluate the effectiveness of Azuka's Dono's army. Mifune finished. Yes, also as you have seen the kind of transports we have, I will be meeting you all on top of the Hokage monument. Naruto added as the table cleared themselves and headed out of the building, along with their bodyguards. Outside of the negotiations room, Naruto, Yugito and Fu were walking at brisk pace to reach their Belle 1 Iroquois. Huey. Helicopters that were waiting for them to depart for the aircraft carrier waiting for them returned to discuss with his generals the results of the meeting. They mainly walked in silence until Yugito couldn't take the suspense any longer. You are playing a big risk here, Naruto-kun. If you lose, then everything we have worked so hard for will be in ruins. Yugito chastised her husband as the trio made their way back to their transports. Naruto sighed as he ran a hand over his head to clear his thoughts and ease the tension he obtained during the meeting. Looking at the concerned expression, his face softened as he spoke in an equally soft voice. I know, Yugito-chan, but rest assured I received the Konoha 11's individual profiles during the meeting, and trust me, they haven't improved much to be considered much of a threat to me. How so? Was the quick remark from his other wife. Looking thoughtful, Naruto went for the scenario that best suited his statement. Which member would be best to describe his point? Lee. No, he had no choice but to specialize in taijutsu. Tenten. No, her she could have diverged her type of weapons, as before she only really used thrown weapons. Then when he was almost out of members, it finally hit him. Neji. Of course, all he really progressed in was the Juken and hadn't widened his variety of jutsu to make him a well-rounded shinobi. Then there was Sakura. Her mentality of a fangirl would make her vulnerable even with training from Tsunade. After a moment of silence, his wives stared at him as they continued to walk without any reply until he snapped his fingers as if he had an epiphany of some kind. Neji Hyuga, for example. His clan pride would not have allowed him to practice anything that wasn't approved of by the Hyuga clan. This means that his arsenal will mainly consist of Juken and other Hyuga clan jutsu. Also, there is Sakura Haruno. She may have had training from Tsunade, however she hasn't gotten rid of her fangirl and superior attitude. That will be her downfall if goaded in the right way. Naruto finished explaining to his two wives. The two looked like they wanted to retort but decided to not. They had asked for an example and he gave them two, which was more than they asked for. Fine then, but I still say you're taking a big risk here. Yugito huffed as the trio finally made it to the Hueys that now were starting to rotate their blades for the imminent order to take them back to the CV-67 where the rest of the army was located. Helping his wives board the helicopters, he gave the order for the pilot to take them back to the headquarters, HQ. After getting a "Hi Azukage-sama," the three helicopters took off and made their way to the large ship that many people were still docking at, only to now stare in awe at their transports as they went past them. On the CV-67, codenamed Baseplate. Upon arriving, the leader of the UWN and his wives were greeted with numerous salutes, to which he returned with a smile and gave an order for a basic outfit for fresh soldiers to be prepared for him for tomorrow. Many of his subordinates were confused at the request but knew not to argue with their superior when it was something important. As soon as everyone went back to their duties, Naruto and his wives headed down towards the war room. This was the place where Naruto, his wives, captains and sergeants came to discuss strategies and other things that needed to be attended to. After passing numerous staff who saluted him and he returned, they soon reached a white door that had the words, War Room, written on the front in the font of impact. Next to it was a fingerprint and retinal scanner that only allowed those that meet the requirements access to the room. Naruto used his own hand and eye to be recognized through the scanner, and after a green light shone on the door there was a robotic voice that stated, "Access granted." This was then followed by the few clicks of a number of locks being released until the door automatically opened to reveal the room itself. The room was a brightly lit room with a red wooden table in the center. The floor was covered in a pale blue carpet and black leather chairs were situated at the table. Said table was rectangular in shape at one end with a chair slightly bigger than the others at one end and had a UWN flag on the wall behind. On the opposite wall had a large computer screen where many details could be listed. The walls themselves were colored in a deep maroon color. Imagine something similar to Call of Duty Black Ops where Mason meets Kennedy. All of his captains were already sitting in their seats and had their sergeants standing at attention behind them, and all of them in their non-combat uniforms. Imagine Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Shepherd's uniform, desert version. Each of their berets had a red swirl badge to signify their allegiance to him. In his army there were 4 ranks: private, sergeant, captain and general. Privates were shown by a red swirl mark just above the elbow on each side of their arm sleeves. These people were considered the lowest of the low, or beginners. Their rank was worth slightly more than genin rank because all soldiers started their service at the age of 18 instead of 13 and were seen as more mature than children. especially when they had already gone through at least 10 years of education before being asked if they would like to join up. Some would join up and some wouldn't. If they did join, then they would go through 2 years of training before being sent out. Some might think that when compared to the Hidden Village's 3-year course that the UWN's course was crap. Bear in mind though that most of the academies in the Hidden Villages mostly taught history and didn't teach the hardships of being in the military, making it look like a way to attain fame and power. In the UWN, all soldiers were trained to expect the worst, from killing people to being interrogated. Overall, the UWN may not teach as long as the Hidden Villages academies. They do however teach the realistic and practicality side of being a soldier. Heck, the 10 years of education before joining the army was considered to be better than the Hidden Villages academies. Especially since in the academies students were taught to recite what they were told, whereas the UWN public schools, AN. Remember I mentioned in the summary that this FIC would be a slight X over with the modern world. Were taught to interpret history and come up with their own theories to situations instead of acting like blind sheep or vengeful, ignorant, arrogant people. Like a certain hidden village whose name begins with K. After 10 years of education they are given the choice to join the Royal Uzumaki Army, or for short the RUA, for 2 years. I know, not very original, but I couldn't come up with anything else, sorry. If anyone has any better names please send them and I will think about changing it, to which after that they are assigned to a squad under the command of a sergeant, captain or general. Back to the topic at hand, next rank to follow them is sergeant, and were the only people considered non-commissioned officers, NCO. Their rank is shown by 3 red swirls forming an upside-down triangle. They have more experience than the privates and have command over them. Therefore privates must listen to their orders unless told otherwise by either another sergeant, a captain or a general. Captains were a different matter, as they, along with generals, were known as commissioned officers, CO. Their rank was shown by 3 golden swirls sewn onto the shoulders of their uniform. To become one, a person must have the following requirements. 1. They must have attained the rank of sergeant. 2. They must have 3 years of experience. 3. They must pass the captaincy exam, AN. Imagine a more harder version of the Chunin exam. 4. Finally, they must be supported by all the generals. Their responsibility lies with commanding a squad of men, AN. That will be explained later on, along with their sergeants, and they only answer to the generals. Then finally the generals. These people are the highest rank in the army and have the responsibility of running it. Only Naruto, Yugito and Fu held this rank, and this was symbolized by the armor they wore, that only generals were allowed to wear. The trench coats they wore before were not their official coats, as they were funnily enough still being made. AN. Pic can be found on profile. Only the coat is needed, ignore everything else. Anyway, if they ever wanted a new general, then one of them would have had to retire and pass it on to someone else. Seated at the table were 5 captains. Each one had a speciality that her squad excelled in. Akio Fujita. She had brown hair that just reached her neck, had crimson eyes and stood at 5 feet 5 inches. She was the commander of the 1st Infantry Squad, and it was mostly a general combat unit that revolved around the saying, Jack of all trades, but master of none. Or in her case it would be, Jill of trades, but master none, whichever works best. Next was Sato Hokkaido. He had sandy blonde hair that was flat and cut short to it almost being non-existent, had jade eyes and stood at 5 feet 6 inches. He was the commander of the 2nd Infantry Squad and was the same kind of outfit as the 1st Infantry Squad. After him was Takahashi Yamagata. He had red hair that also flat and cut short, but only to about an inch's worth was left, had violet eyes and stood at 5 feet 9 inches. He too was in command of an infantry squad, the 3rd Infantry Squad to be exact, and it also was the same kind of unit as the 1st and 2nd Infantry Squads. Infantry squads aside, the next captain was Inoue Kyoto. She had raven hair that was tied up into a bun, had coal black eyes and stood at 5 feet 4 inches. Unlike the other captains, she was in charge of the 1st Medic Squad. They did not do any fighting, instead they set up field hospitals, worked at already existing hospitals as doctors and nurses, and they trained field medics to be assigned to each of the other squads in case one of them become wounded. Yamamoto Okayama followed her. He had blue hair reach his chin but surprisingly didn't obstruct his view, had brown eyes and stood at 5 feet 8 inches. He was in command of the 1st Airborne Squad. They were to man anything that involved the air, ranging from jets and bomber planes to helicopters and nuclear strikes. Following him was Sakamoto Kumamoto. He had green hair that was cut the same as Takahashi, had blue eyes and stood at 6 feet. He was the captain for the 1st Armor Squad, who were to command all land vehicles from boats to tanks. Lastly was Kinjo Okinawa. He had brown hair pulled into a low ponytail, had honey brown eyes and stood at 5 feet 7 inches. He was in charge of the 1st Supply Squad, whose responsibility was to make sure that supplies were always available, ranging from bombs to medical kits. Upon seeing their generals, they all stood up to attention and saluted simultaneously. Azukage-sama. They chorused at the same time. Naruto smiled at the professionalism of his army. They were a cross between the Hokage Jiji's Will of Fire and Danzo's idea of shinobi tools. Both had merits and both had faults. Naruto viewed the world in a slightly different light that closely resembled the theory of yin and yang. That so long as one thing existed, the opposite would also exist. So long as there was light, there were also shadows. And where there were shadows, there was light. There could never be one color, only different shades of gray. The perfect example being the situations between the East and West. The East were in constant war and lost family and friends. People hardly found any life-lasting peace and had to struggle to survive, either from physical problems like killings by shinobi or mental problems such as prejudice. This led to the East gaining a very dark shade of gray. The West, on the other hand, found peace and unity. Friends and family prospered, and most losses were due to either old age or unfortunate accidents or incurable diseases. Therefore people were able to live safe lives and not have to constantly train and kill to survive. And thus the West gained a very light shade of gray. At ease, captains. Pause as the captains relax their stances. Now first I would like to say thank you for attending this meeting, as it affects everyone here and it revolves around the call for an alliance from the elemental nations. Please may you take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Naruto greeted as the captains took their seats and awaited for Naruto to continue. Seating in the chair at the end of the table and Yugito and Fu moving to sit in the chairs immediately next to him, Naruto picked up the remote control for the screen on the opposite wall and switched it on. Alright, the alliance was called for by the following people. Tsunade Senju, Godem Hokage of Konoha. The screen gave a flash and blipped as an image of Tsunade appeared and covered the whole wall. Wolf whistle. Damn, that lady has huge knockers. Slam, shut up, pervert. Inoue whispered harshly to Sakamoto and retracted her fist from his head, which now sported a rather large swelling. This caused many in the room to snicker at the man's suffering before a cough from Naruto told them to focus, though he and his wives had smirks adorning their features. Cough. Yeah, well, I wouldn't try anything. She is actually an old lady and uses a genjutsu to look young. Naruto said, causing many at the table to openly laugh at the gaping mouth Sakamoto now had. Anyway, back to the reason at hand. She along with Gaara no Sabaku, the Godem Kazekage. A picture of Gaara appeared. Onoki, the Sandaime Tsuchikage. Another picture showed, but this time of the Tsuchikage. Mei Terumi, the Godem Mizukage. The next picture showed Mei as the Mizukage. The Yondaime Reikage. The picture of him shocked the generals slightly at seeing at how bulky the man was and noted that he seemed to have become the Reikage mainly because of strength in body and not mind. And Mifune, leader of the samurai in Tetsu no Kuni, asked for an alliance between their shinobi alliance and our united whirlpool nations. Safe to say that the negotiations went as I expected. Naruto stated as more pictures started to show until all the leaders were now on the screen. After getting their appearances down in detail. Sakamoto paying extra detail to the Mizukage. They all noticed what Naruto had said at the end. What do you mean, Naruto-sama? Akio asked as the other captains listened in to his response. When I went to this meeting I expected it to be a slow in progress, and suffice to say I was right, because since this army can't use chakra, the Tsuchikage was convinced that we would not be able to provide anything of value. So he made a bet with me. Naruto replied as the captains became angry at the accusation. What were the rewards and conditions, Naruto-sama? Kinjo questioned as the others nodded in anticipation. The stakes were the United Whirlpool Nation and Uzushiogakure. The bet itself is a one-on-one tournament between the Konoha 11 and I, the rules being that I must only use equipment available to fresh soldiers and that I get to rest between each match. Naruto finished explaining the bet to his captains. The captains themselves grinned at the prospect of seeing some of the most elite shinobi of Konoha, and their leaders past tormentors, humiliated by their leader with only the equipment available to new soldiers. Then they would gain more contracts with traders, thereby gaining a higher economy. The best part was the experience their soldiers would gain by being escorts to the traders. Finally, they could use Uzushio as a main port to their ships, as it was the only elemental nation that had the deep seas available to make building ports faster. So when will this happen? Takahashi asked with a grin. Grinning back, Naruto replied, tomorrow at Konoha's Chunin Exam Stadium. We, and I mean all of us aside from the sergeants. Sorry guys, but I need you on watch in case something happens. The sergeants smiled and nodded in understanding. Thank you for understanding, and so we will be given seats for everyone but me to watch the event. There will also be potential clients that may want to do business with our nation. From there I will face each of the Konoha 11 in one-on-one combat matches, to which I must win all of them to win the bet. Nodding back in response, Naruto decided to give his captains some advice for when they arrive at Konoha. Before we finish this meeting, I would like to give you some advice for when we arrive in Konoha. Firstly, as soon as we arrive, I want you all to activate your hidden cameras. This way, if you are attacked, we will have proof that you are only defending yourselves, as is within the rights of visitors. Second, control yourselves. The people there are capable of saying some very harmful things, and if you must get angry with them, then only insult back, do not ever throw the first punch. Third, people will be curious about you and will try to gain information indirectly through you. This is where my trust with you is at its highest, for I trust you not to reveal anything they can use to their advantage. Then lastly, be on guard. These people are known to bring in mobs to beat on people. Kami knows how many I was subjected to. If they do bring a mob to hunt you, then stand your ground, use your flares to signal us, and use lethal force if necessary. Just make sure they're after you first and they pull the first move. Other than that, all I can say is enjoy yourselves. Oh, and if you happen to go to Ichiraku ramen stand, then please tell them I've missed them and I am willing to offer then a place in the UWN especially for them if they want to move. Naruto advised his captains, who nodded in response. Okay then, meeting concluded, and be ready at 9 AM for transportation. Naruto finished as everyone gave him and his wives salutes before giving orders to their sergeants and leaving the room. Once they were gone, Naruto let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Damn, that was a long meeting, he thought as he wiped away the sweat that had been forming on his forehead with his hand. He was about to stand up before he was brought into a three-way kiss with his wives. The taste of their tongues and mouths were heavenly to the blonde, as they had their own unique flavors. Yugito's had a hint of fish and milk, whilst Fu's tasted mostly of oranges. A few minutes passed until the need for air became apparent. Yugito-chan, Fu-chan, what brought this on? He questioned them. Their response was to grin before both started to grind themselves against him, causing all three to become aroused. We believe that you need some relaxation before the big event tomorrow, Naruto-kun. Yugito purred as she placed her hand on his crotch as squeezed him slightly through his clothes. Glancing at the clock, he noticed that it was only 7 PM. Plenty of time for some fun, he thought mischievously as he heard a "Go kid" from Kurama. Grabbing his wives by their waists, he disappears. That will be explained later on, to their bedroom to relax. And it was on that day that the west side of the ship wished Kami have mercy on those on the eastern side. For the sounds of Naruto making love to his wives certainly didn't. At the same time in Konoha, Hokage's tower, Tsunade sat at her desk, and next to her were the other cages, all of whom had blank faces. In front of her desk were the Konoha 11 along with their sensei, Iruka and Anko. As Tsunade eyed each of the occupants, many felt a chill run down their spines, especially those who she knew were responsible for Naruto's suffering. Tsunade, seeing how nervous they were, decided to present them the challenge that was agreed to. Okay, the reason you are all here is because when we met with the Azukage, one of us accused his support as being inadequate. Tsunade then glared at the Tsuchikage, who hmphed and looked away. Before she could continue, she heard a snort from a certain raven-haired Avenger. He doesn't know Itachi is already dead. Turning towards the Uchiha, she took note of him and his history. Sasuke was wearing the traditional Jonin outfit and wore his Hite-8 on his forehead. He also carried a tanto strapped vertically to the back of his right shoulder. After Naruto was banished, he was immediately reinstated as a shinobi and was given no punishment, much to Tsunade's chagrin. In fact, he was praised even more for getting rid of the demon, and it downright pissed her off that the man responsible for banishing the person she saw as a little brother. Something to say, Uchiha-san? She growled as the man gave his usual smirk. Yeah, actually. Why do we need help from them? They can't even use chakra. In fact, I say that we invade them and take over the West. Then enslave them, as they should have been the moment they lost their chakra. Sasuke said with Sakura cheering him on. Mainly of the Konoha 11 wanted to disagree with them, but honestly didn't know what the UWN was capable of, so they kept quiet. Sasuke was about to rant on more but was silenced by his sensei, who grabbed his shoulder tightly. Sasuke, was you there at the meeting between the Azukage and the leaders of the Shinobi Alliance? Kakashi asked the Uchiha, who shook his head and was quiet. No. Well then, Uchiha-san, it'll be best that you keep quiet, because whatever they lack in chakra they made up for in technology, Tsunade snapped. Sasuke gritted his teeth and wanted to yell at the Hokage, but decided against it and went back to brooding and coming up with numerous ways to kill his brother. Boy, was he going to be disappointed. Now that that is sorted, let me tell you about the bet. The stakes were rather high, to say the least. You, the Konoha 11, will face the Azukage in a one-on-one battle tournament. The rules include that the Azukage must be allowed to rest between matches should he want to, and that the Azukage must use only equipment that are given to fresh soldiers. The rewards are: if the Azukage wins, then Hai no Kuni must give the UWN Uzushiogakure and all that it contained before the Fire Daimyo claimed it, But if the Azucage loses, then the UWN all that it has will be given to the Shinobi Alliance without question. Tsunade announced as looks of shock mad their way to the other occupants of the room, minus those who already knew. The guy must be an arrogant as well as an idiotic leader if he wanted a losing wish like that. Sakura insulted as the people who were at the meeting looked at the pink-haired Kunoichi with an, "Are you an idiot?" look. Well, that is what you think. Now though, I would like to conclude this meeting at an end and wish everybody a nice day. Tsunade concluded as the other cages nodded and left the room to go to their hotel rooms for the night. The cage though sent a small glare to the Uchiha and Haruno on his way out, though the Uchiha scoffed and the Haruno glared. Once they had gone, Tsunade took the time to observe the Jonin and Tokubetsu Jonin that now stood presently. The Konoha 11 sensei hadn't changed at all except for getting older. Iruka hadn't changed either except that he was slightly cold towards his old students for disregarding his teachings on looking after comrades. Anko had changed slightly, only difference being that she no longer was a Tokubetsu Jonin, but a fully fledged Jonin, though it took a lot of convincing the council to allow her to take the exams. Neji Hyuga, a Jonin and wore the standard Hyuga Jonin robe, an. Apart from Sasuke and Naruto, all of the Konoha 11 are wearing their Shippuden outfits. His attitude had changed greatly from his Genin days, namely he had dropped his entire fate complex and wasn't cold to everyone unless he believed they deserved it, like a certain Uchiha and Banshee. Shikamaru Nara, a Jonin and wore standard Jonin clothes. He was still as lazy as ever, though his intelligence was showing more now than ever, and he had been increasing his physical training due to the war. He had also become the head of the Nara clan after his father was killed in battle with some Auto Jonin. Shoji Akamichi, a Jonin and wore samurai-like armor so that he could use his family jutsu efficiently, and he grew his hair out more. He still ate as much as he did before, and he was still quite cheerful, since his father passed on the title to him and retired. Shino Aburame, a Jonin and wore a big coat that covered him completely. He took over his clan when his father became too old to carry the title and so became clan head. He was still as stoic as ever from his Genin days, though he did show a bit of emotion from time to time. Ino Yamanaka, a Tokubetsu Jonin and wore a more older version of her Genin outfit. She was the clan head, but her father still worked in the TI, torture and interrogation, department. She was also more level-headed from her Genin days, her abuse of Naruto before his banishment being the most influential. Kiba Inuzuka, a Tokubetsu Jonin, but was not a clan head and wore a dark jacket and pants. His partner, Akamaru, had grown to a height that allowed Kiba to ride him if needed. His attitude hadn't changed much, still brash and hard-headed, though he was a little bit more calmer than before. His mother was still clan head, but was planning to give him the title soon. Hinata Hyuga, a Tokubetsu Jonin, but was also not a clan head, and wore a blue and white coat and pants. She was still shy, but only it had lessened down by a lot. She was due to be the new clan head, but the clan elders were giving Hiyashi trouble with it, claiming that she wasn't good enough. Today she was still hurting over what she had done to Naruto and was waiting to apologize to him when she got the chance, especially when shortly after he was banished and she found out the truth she broke down crying and sobbing. It took 2 weeks to get her back on duty, and when she did she was for a time quiet and unresponsive. Tenten, a Tokubetsu Jonin and wore a white top and red pants. She had gained the title of Konoha's weapons mistress over the time. She would constantly use her skills in weapon using to gain a reputation. She hadn't changed much in terms of attitude, but no longer fawned over Neji as much as she did in her Genin days, and unlike Sakura she wouldn't let it cloud her judgment. Rock Lee, a Jonin and wore the exact same thing as he did in his Genin days, but also wore the Jonin vest along with it. He was so alike guy that many people got them confused, and the only way to tell them apart was if you knew them on a personal level to make the differences. Sakura Haruno, a Tokubetsu Jonin and wore a red tank top and a pink skirt with black biker shorts. Apart from being a medic nin, she had not changed at all. In fact, apart from the jutsu Tsunade taught her, she was basically the same from her Genin days. Still a fangirl and still annoyed everyone that didn't do as she ordered. Recently the girl had been demanding Tsunade to give her the slug contract and pass on the title of slug sage to her. Tsunade said no and that the contract would be passed on to her first apprentice, Shizune. All right, now that they are gone, I would like to say that the Azucage is a very powerful person. In fact, when faced with the challenge he was confident, not arrogant, that he could do it. Also I would like to say that we all know the Azucage personally. Tsunade stated as the other occupants, minus those who knew, thought on who it could be. It's Naruto, isn't Tsunade-sama? Hinata immediately said as the ones who didn't know snapped their heads to her in shock. It made sense since the only other person they knew personally, not quite right there lady, was Naruto. They were even more shocked when Tsunade nodded and opened her mouth to explain but was cut off by a screech from Sakura. That baka is the Azucage. Huh, we sealed his ability to use hand seals, he can't have become powerful without them. Sakura screeched as the others winced slightly at her loud voice. What are you talking about? Lee can't use hand seals, and look at him, a full Jonin using only taijutsu. So I wouldn't go underestimating him. After all, many of you had done that before, and look where that got you. Tsunade countered, pointedly looking at Sasuke and Neji. So the Dobi is the leader of the West. This'll be easy. Sasuke arrogantly stated as he smirked again. I wouldn't be too sure of that, but if it's what you think, then so be it. However, do not go complaining if he beats you. Personally, I want him to win. Konoha has taken everything he should have had and made it their own without giving anything in return for it. Tsunade snapped at the Uchiha, who scoffed at the thought of the Dobi being special. What could the Dobi have had that was so special to Konoha? Tsunade smirked, and for some reason that made Sasuke very nervous all of a sudden. I'm glad you asked that. Firstly, the Uzumaki clan were the ones who made the best seals, including the caged bird seal used by the Hyuga clan. When the Shodem Hokage married Mito Uzumaki, the Hyuga clan head asked for a seal to keep the Byakugan safe. She did, but she didn't put in the painful part of the seal. That was the Hyuga elders doing by bastardizing it. Next was the fact that due to the close ties with the Senju, the Uzumaki allowed Konoha to use their clan symbol as a sign of friendship between the two nations. Today it is used on our Hitei 8 and Chunin and Jonin vests as a swirl on the back, but now the people don't know the origin of the symbol and now shame it by wearing it, especially those who abused Naruto. Finally, Uzushio is Naruto's land by birthright, since he is the only known Uzumaki of the royal Uzumaki clan of Uzushiogakure. Tsunade finished giving her long-winded speech. The others were shocked at how much Naruto's clan was worth to them, and some began to question themselves. Some even began to imagine what it would be like without their symbol. It made them shiver at the thought. Right now, though, you need to prepare for tomorrow. You will report to the Chunin exam stadium to battle the Azukages in single combat. I will leave it up to you to decide the order of who will fight. Dismissed. Tsunade ordered as everyone bowed, minus Sasuke and Sakura, and disappeared in a series of shunshuns. When they had gone, Tsunade swiveled in her chair to look out the window over the once great Konohagakure that her grandfather founded and that had now lost the ideas that he wanted it to believe in. I can only hope he doesn't permanently cripple them, and no doubt the council. Well, the civilian council to be precise will be furious to hear the news. Then the elders and Danzo will push for him to be killed or kidnapped and made into a human weapon. Sigh. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, and I am going to need a lot of sake to get rid of the headache that is going to come. Naruto, even when you're not doing it intentionally, you still cause me headaches. Tsunade tiredly thought, but had a small smile on regardless. Picking up her sake bottle, she poured herself a cup, gave a brief toast, downed the alcohol in one go, and prayed to Kami have mercy on her when the time came. Because tomorrow's event certainly won't. That was the sound of Naruto smashing his alarm clock to pieces as he slowly opened his eyes, to see the wonderful view of both of his wives sleeping on either side of him. Yugito was on his left side and Fu was on his right, both with smiles on their faces as they snuggled into him. He chuckled slightly before deciding it best to wake them by bending his head down. He planted kisses on both of their foreheads, causing them to stir in their sleep. Eventually the pair started to awake and both yawned in synchronization, to which he found to be cute when both wiped the sleep out of their eyes before they concentrated on him. Smiling back at him, the two women kissed him on lips as their form of mourning. Well, that sure is one way to wake up to a beautiful sight, especially after what we did last night. Naruto smirked as they broke the kiss and winked at his wives, who blushed deeply when they remembered last night's activities. Yugito then lightly slapped him for the comment. Naruto-kun, stop being a pervert. Yugito playfully reprimanded that only caused all three to laugh lightly. It was then that they caught sight of the clock on the opposite wall and noticed that it was 8 a.m., meaning that they had an hour to get ready before having to meet the captains at the Hueys for their departure to Konoha, a place that Naruto was in no hurry to arrive at all. I think it's time we get up. After all, it wouldn't do good to come late and disappoint everyone, Naruto said as all three began to change into their uniform and eat breakfast. After they ate breakfast, they made their way to the launch deck of the aircraft carrier. On the way they received numerous salutes, to which they returned and proceeded to climb the corridors until they finally reached the launch deck. On the deck, 3 Hueys were stationed in a line, and in the cockpit were both pilots that were doing final checks on the machines to make sure they were working properly. In front of them stood the captains and 15 soldiers. The 15 soldiers were standing at attention and in 3 ranks of 5. The captains stood a few feet in front and facing them. When they saw Naruto, Yugito and Fu arriving, Akio began the drill. Commanding officer on deck. Salute, she finished yelling as each member of the group saluted their generals. Said generals marched in sync until they stood in the center between the captains and the privates. At ease, men. Naruto ordered as the soldiers withdrew their hands from their foreheads and placed their hands behind their backs whilst widening the space between the legs in a more relaxed stance. Once they were done, Naruto thought it best that he give the advice he had given his captains the previous day, as they would be being inserted into a potential hostile country. They needed to be aware of the tension that was sure to come about whilst in Konoha. Now first of all, I want the first rank and the first two people on the left in the following rank to take one step forward. The first rank, containing 5 soldiers, and the other 2 soldiers took one step forward completely simultaneously. You 7 will be bodyguards for captains Fujita, Hokkaido, Yamagata, Kyoto, Okayama, Kumamoto and Okinawa. You will defend them until told otherwise by either a captain or general. We will be traveling to Konohagakure and our ETA is 1,200 hours. The east is a very hostile area and you will treat everyone there with caution. When we arrive, you will activate your hidden cameras. This will serve mainly as evidence in case you are attacked. In the event that you are attacked, you are allowed to use lethal force. They may also come at you in a mob, if so use your flares to signal us and stand your ground until reinforcements arrive. When we arrive, we will head to Konoha's Chunin Exam Stadium, where I will face the Konoha 11 in one-on-one matches. You will be guarding the captains in their designated seating area and will prohibit anyone from entering unless given permission by either the captains or generals. After that, we will stay at a hotel where tomorrow the negotiations will continue. Then we will rendezvous with the Huis, codenamed Hawk, and extract back to HQ. In the meantime, everyone else is to secure the rendezvous point and make sure no one unfavorable tries to sabotage us or gain information on our armed forces. Understood? Naruto finished as he waited for their replies. Sir, yes sir, they chorused all together. Right face, Sato stated as the soldiers all turned 90 degrees clockwise so that they were now facing the Huis. Mount up, Sato continued as each rank marched in sync towards each helicopter and proceeded to board them and check their weapons and other equipment to make sure they were in good conditions. When they were all seated, Naruto, Yugito, Fu and the captains also boarded the Huis as the rotating blades started to pick up speed and dust. Upon taking his seat, Naruto pressed his right index and middle finger to his ear in order to activate his codec. It was a very advanced form of communications that allowed all of his subordinates to contact him and, if necessary, allow the views of their hidden cameras to appear on his interface. The best part of it was that it practically invisible unless you were up close to him. Okay, we'll be moving in a reverse triangular formation. Hawks 1 and 3 will be at the front whilst Hawk 2 will be at the back, and keep an eye out for anyone suspicious. This applies specifically to those who wear the attire of the Akatsuki or wear an Auto Hite 8. Confirm orders. Sir, yes sir, was the resounding response as the Huis took off and headed towards Konohagakure with the cheers of the soldiers still on the ship following them across the water. As the helicopter swept past villages, rivers and forestry, Naruto couldn't help but reminisce the experience that he once had with the continent, and despite the fact that he didn't like the hidden villages, he couldn't help but enjoy the feeling of nostalgia as the fresh air whisked past him and he closed his eyes for a moment before sighing in relaxation. Upon opening them again, he looked at the serious expressions on each of his soldiers' faces and had a small flashback on how he got them to be disciplined. Flashback. The hidden villages system is crap. They're too lenient towards them and allow dangerous personalities to come to fruit, especially since they allow them to become legal adults as soon as they pass their Jonin Sensei test. Naruto thought as he stared at his clock and tapped his left index finger on the desk in a smooth rhythm. He noticed these flaws when he thought back on his experiences. Sakura and Ino were allowed to continue their fangirl tendencies. Sasuke was still able to be an avenger. Choji could stuff himself. Shikamaru could still be lazy. Kiba could still be hot-headed. Hinata was still shy. Shino was allowed to invade the privacy of his comrades with his insects. Lee could still be too loud. Tenten was still allowed to only specialize in weapons and not advised to widen her range of jutsu, despite her ability to perform nin, tai and genjutsu. Then finally Neji was still able to rely on his Juken as a Hyuga and was not told to also widen his range of jutsu, especially since his Byakugan and high chakra control, which was required for Juken to be utilized, could be used for medical jutsu to prevent the loss of life when on missions. Each of them had major flaws that could be taken advantage of. No, what Naruto needed was a system that allowed the soldiers relax and be serious when on missions, as well as make them become well-rounded soldiers that could adapt to any situation. Kami, he knew how many times problems had come about on missions because his comrades would allow their faults to rule their decisions or their weaknesses were exposed and ultimately brought more danger than needed to the mission. Example being Neji's strength was only in Juken whilst his other skills were academy level, or Sasuke and his revenge-driven ego. An idea then came to him as he stopped tapping the table with his finger. That's it, Naruto inwardly shouted, causing him to wake up Kurama from inside his head. What is Kit? he questioned as he took a yawn and stretched out to click his joints in place. I just came up with a system to allow my men relaxation but remain serious on missions and allow them to be adaptive, Naruto replied as the kitsune raised an eyebrow waiting for the answer. How can you do that, kid? All those ninja in Konoha and the other hidden villages only know discipline when their cages or leaders yell at them. Tours. In peace, each soldier will have 6 months relaxation where they are not required to do any missions and can use the time for themselves whilst also being required to train to meet the standards we give. Then they must spend 6 months on duty and are expected to be serious about it and not allow their personal lives to get in the way. In war, the time spent on duty will be increased due to the constant fighting, and the relaxation period will have to decrease. We will also teach them not to complain, as they would have been trained to accept the risk of discomfort and that they had the choice to not join but did. Lastly, we'll also give tests later on to make sure that they are still fit for service, and anyone who isn't is either retrained or discharged if they reach over the limit of times they're allowed to fail. Kurama thought about the idea and admitted that it had quite a lot of merit to it. It would especially help the UWN avoid the problem of insubordination, and as a result the UWN could avoid the consequences caused by them, such as a war because a soldier killed a high-standing official from a foreign country because they insulted them. He was even more convinced of this when he remembered that some of the shinobi wars were started because of less provocative activities. Okay, kid, it sounds like a good idea, specifically since it would mean less trouble for you as you do run a nation that rivals all the elemental nations put together, Kurama stated as he went back to sleep. Naruto's sweat dropped at his tenant's ability to just sleep. He had to be lazier than the Naris. Meanwhile, in Konoha, a certain pineapple-haired Chunin sneezed, breaking his concentration from the shogi game he was playing and sending the pieces flying over at his ex-sensei. Troublesome. Someone must be talking about me. Damn, I was so close to winning that round. Sigh. Guess the score is still 100-30 and to Shikamaru no less. I knew he was a genius, but this takes the rice cake. Thought a certain smoking Sarutobi. Anyway, Naruto grabbed his ballpoint pen and started writing down the orders for the new system he wanted implemented for his army. End flashback. It was then that he noticed a wooden crate that was on the helicopter. On top it had the words, "Standard Military Outfit," in big bold impact font, and below it in a smaller font was the list of what it contained. 1X Standard Combat Uniform. AN. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Ranger Outfit, Forest Version. 1X First Aid Kit. 2X Flashbangs. 2X Smoke Grenades. 3X M67 Fragmentation Grenades. 1X Beretta M9. 5x9mm ammunition magazines, 15 rounds per magazine. 1X Stun Knife. 1X Gas Mask. 1X Thermal Night Vision Goggles. 4X Ration Bars. 1X Water Canteen, plus other necessities. The crate itself was missing the standard Colt M16A2, but Naruto had denied it as he believed that the rifle was only really necessary when facing numerous opponents at once and not in one-on-one fights. Looking towards his wives, he saw that they were staring out over the continent as well. Probably thinking back to their time here as well. He thought before closing his eyes to rest before he would have to face his former comrades. His thoughts were spot on as his wives were thinking back on their time in the elemental nations. Yugito was remembering the only good times she spent with Team Samui that included Karui, Omui and Samui as their leader. Fu was thinking back on her only friend Shibuki, the leader of Takigakure and also a friend of Naruto when he was still a part of Team 7 and was tasked to escort him back to Taki to rule it. In fact, due to unforeseen problems he ended up saving Taki, although his sensei only seemed to praise the other two. Looking back to their husband and then glancing at each other, they both came to the same conclusion. We're not going to let anyone hurt Naruto-kun or either of us because of their bitterness. That we swear on. Meanwhile in Konoha, the Kages, Mifune, the Konoha 11, their sensei, Anko and Iruka were all standing atop the Hokage monument that now had Tsunade's face added to it. Tsunade herself was pacing back and forth, biting her thumbnail every so often with a look of worry on her face. Though nobody who knew of her connection to the blonde Jinchuriki would blame her, as she did view him as a surrogate little brother. The Konoha 11 had mixed feelings. Some people were curious as to what their friend now looked like and how he became a leader to a continent that had basically the same problems as them. These were Shikamaru, Shino, Lee and Choji. Then there were people who were nervous about meeting the man who they had beaten 10 years ago. These were Ino, Hinata, Kiba, Tenten and Neji. Finally there were those who wanted nothing more than to beat the man to a pulp and steal all that he had made to fulfill their own desires, namely Sasuke and Sakura. The Konoha 11 senseis, along with Iruka and Anko, were wondering what the blonde looked like after 10 years, aside from Guy and Kakashi, who already knew but refused to divulge any information on him. Many though shivered when they heard Anko whisper to herself all the possibilities that he could look like as well as how he had grown. In more ways than just height-wise. The Cages and Mifune were just thinking of ways of how Naruto could beat any of the Konoha, and so far they couldn't come up with anything. The only thing they thought he could fight with was hand-to-hand combat and weapons, and even then they were sure it wouldn't compare to the Konoha 11s since they can use chakra and he can't. It was 12 p.m. when the Cages, Mifune, Guy and Kakashi heard the familiar chopping sound of the Hueys. They glanced at the others who were looking around wondering what the noise was. "What is that sound?" was the question that was generally being mentally asked amongst those who had not encountered the helicopters. Looking out over Konoha, they saw the Hueys approaching them at high speeds that they themselves would be hard-pressed to match. Those who hadn't seen them before wondered how on earth a nation that had no access to chakra could make something that could achieve flight. A feat that only a few in Iwa could do. They were not the only ones staring up at them in confusion and awe, as many of the Konoha villagers and ninja were thinking the same thing. What the hell? They heard Kiba shout as everyone was forced to hunch over slightly as the Hueys started to land in the clearing behind the Hokage monument. As soon as the rotating blades stopped moving, the shinobi and samurai were able to stand at their full height again and gazed at the men and women standing before them. Naruto, his wives and his captains stepped out of their transports first and formed two ranks, Naruto and his wives in the front and his captains behind them. The other soldiers were still on the helicopters unloading the luggage everyone had brought with them. Naruto and his company gave a small bow in respect before he decided to greet the leaders. "Good evening Hokage Dono, Kazekage Dono, Mizukage Dono, Tsuchikage Dono, Reikage Dono and Mifune Dono." He then glanced impassively to the others in the audience, who all shifted slightly, except two who glared at him. Inwardly rolling his eyes at his ex-teammate's childish behavior, Naruto continued his introduction. "Along with me are my commanding officers of the United Whirlpool Military. May I introduce Generals Yugito ni Uzumaki and Fu Uzumaki. After them are my captains. Captain Akio Fujita, commander of the 1st Infantry Squad. Captain Sato Hokkaido, commander of the 2nd Infantry Squad. Captain Takahashi Yamagata, commander of the 3rd Infantry Squad. Captain Inoue Kyoto, commander of the 1st Medic Squad. Captain Yamamoto Okayama, commander of the 1st Airborne Squad. Captain Sakamoto Kumamoto, commander of the 1st Armor Squad. Then finally Captain Kinjo Okinawa, commander of the 1st Supply Squad." Once Naruto had finished, Yugito, Fu and the captains all gave a salute which confused the leaders but responded with a slight bow to show their respect. "Welcome Azukage Dono. I believe that we should all depart to the stadium where you can change and then we can commence the tournament," Mifune stated monotonously as the Cages and Naruto nodded in response. Turning back to the Hueys, Naruto called out, "You know your orders." At that moment each soldier immediately leapt into action, where 5 of the 7 bodyguards marched to each of their assigned captains, whilst the other 2 picked up the crate and brought it off of the helicopter. The remaining soldiers went about setting up the area so that they could sleep there whilst also being easily able to respond to any attack. The position Naruto and his group formed, where Naruto and his wives were at the front, the captains were behind them, along with the 2 carrying the crate, and the other bodyguards formed a protection circle around. While walking through the village, the group got many confused looks from the populace due to their odd appearance, which changed to glares when they recognized their leader. The Cages and their group were sweating slightly when they saw the looks being given and hoped that none of them would try anything stupid. "Hey, isn't that the Kyuubi brat? Monster should have died. They should be arrested and executed just for existing. No doubt those other people are being controlled by some genjutsu." As the insults continued being whispered, the ninja of the group who cared about Naruto and his company started to sweat even more. Some even took a moment to observe their reactions. To their surprise, none of their guests were showing any physical reaction to the negative treatment. They could tell through their eyes that they were annoyed, but other than that, nothing. Most of their own would have showed some kind discomfort, but these UWN soldiers were acting as if nothing was going on, though they did tense when the looks changed from curiosity to hostile. Soon they arrived at the stadium that was currently empty but would be full of people once the matches began. "All right, now that we have arrived, we can begin. Azukage Dono, you and your men carrying the equipment may go to the changing room to change and then go to the arena where you will face the Konoha 11. Your generals, captains and their bodyguards may sit with us in the cage box. From there on we will begin the matches," Tsunade said as Naruto nodded and motioned for the privates holding the crate to follow him. Time skip. 2 hours later. The stands were packed with both civilians and shinobi, with the Cages and Naruto group being on the cage box that had been expanded to better accommodate the extra weight. Seeing that everyone was in position, Tsunade stood up and began the announcement. "Welcome everybody. Today the Shinobi Alliance has arranged for a tournament between Konohagakure's Konoha 11 and the United Whirlpool Nation's Azukage, Naruto Uzumaki." At the mention of the Konoha 11, many cheered, but they changed to boos and many other negative insults when they heard who the Azucage was. Demon. We should have kill. Silence. Tsunade shouted, quietening the crowds with a burst of ki. Once they were settled down, Tsunade went back to announcing the part of the bet. Now this was decided because the effectiveness of the Azucage's military was brought into question. In response, a challenge was presented. The Azucage will face the Konoha 11 in one-on-one battles. Should he lose to any of them, his nation will be under the immediate control of the Shinobi Alliance, but if he defeats them all, then Uzushiogakure will become a part of the United Whirlpool Nation. Now let's proceed to the first match. Tsunade finished as she received cheers from the people in the stands. When she sat back down, she turned towards Kakashi and the other Jonin sensei who were stationed as the guards for the cages during the event. So Kakashi, what was the layout of the matches that your students decided on? Looking over to his superior, the copy Nin gave her his patented eye smile, which really annoyed people since so far nobody had seen his face other than his late father, late mother and the late medic Nin that saw him at birth. Well, Hokage-sama, apparently the Konoha 11 still think that Azucage-sama still has a crush on Sakura and that should be enough to win. After her it is Ino, Hinata, Tenten, Shikamaru, Shino, Choji, Kiba, Lee, Neji and then Sasuke. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at the statement about Sakura. First match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Sakura Haruno, begin. But isn't Naruto Ilrea? Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. What? Minutes earlier. Naruto walked out of the dark hallway into the arena where he was met with the familiar scene of the forest clearing that he had been competing in to become a Chunin over a decade ago. It looked clean, and although many of the trees and plants had been replaced and moved around, it didn't stop the small flashback he had that showed his match with Neji. He was no longer wearing his armor but instead wore the standard combat uniform for his soldiers. On his right hip was the holster for his M9 and on his lower back was his stun knife placed horizontally. Also he had his other various pieces of equipment on his person with easy access to them. Walking into the arena full of confidence that wasn't backed up by mere arrogance, but instead confidence that was supported by skills. When he heard the comments made about him when he was announced, he mentally shook his head at the stupidity that had come about. It made him think how blind or idiotic the previous Hokages could have been if they believed Konoha to care for all of its inhabitants like family when they have shown time and time again that they don't care about anybody if it was only slightly not human. To add insult to the injury, the civilians are trying to control the shinobi as if they were their servants, and if they were challenged they would say the demon is controlling them. Then again, he hasn't seen firsthand what the village was like before the Kyuubi attack, so he couldn't judge them on that, though he was not allowing them to use that as an excuse for what they had done. They had been told to treat him like a hero by their prized Yondaime and they spat on it. Whatever happens to them is because of their own doing, not the Hokages. Upon seeing who the proctor would be for the tournament, he turned a bright red at seeing Enko Midarashi, standing in the center of the clearing in the same outfit she had worn during the Chunin exams. It was always baffled him on how she could wear something like that and not in the least feel insecure about it. When said woman turned and saw Naruto standing there, she gave him a big grin that seemed to stretch across her face. Hey there, stud. So you ready for your first match? Yeah, I'm ready. Let's get this show started then. Naruto nodded, giving a smile back to the snake using kunoichi. Right. By the way, when this is over, do you want to get some dinner together after this? She asked in surprisingly nervous tone. Raising an eyebrow, Naruto thought back on his interactions with the woman. She wasn't mean to me like everyone else, and in fact she is treated to a lesser extent like me because of her past affiliation with Orochimaru, so maybe, he thought before replying. Sure, but anything further and we will need to talk to Fu-chan and Yugito-chan about it. I don't want to start dating anyone that would upset my two wives, so it will be their decision overall. Sighing, Enko nodded in response. She knew it would be difficult, but it didn't stop her. In fact, she saw it as a kind of challenge. To be honest with herself, she had had a slight crush on the blonde when she was assigned to be his hidden guard when his birthday came about. He wasn't beaten constantly, just on his birthdays that coincided with the Kyuubi's attack. Other than that though, he was ripped off when shopping, if he was even allowed to shop there in the first place. He was insulted by just about everyone in the village and was sabotaged in the academy by the teachers, except for Iruka. In fact, Naruto in a way had suffered worse than Gaara did, despite saying otherwise during the Chunin exams. This was because even though everyone knew about Gaara's status, he was never actually beaten because of Shukaku. He certainly wasn't ripped off by store owners, and he knew who his parents were despite thinking that they hated him. The only thing that he had over Naruto in that department was that he was robbed of sleep, which was fixed recently when the Ichibi was ripped out of him and Lady Chiyo sacrificed herself to bring him back to life. Back to the subject at hand. Before any of them could continue, they heard footsteps from the other side of the clearing. Naruto Baka, quit harassing the proctor, Sakura said as she scowled and stomped towards the center. Naruto's response was to just put on a blank expression. Once they were all ready for the fight, Anko went over the rules. Now the rules of these fights will be as follows: everything goes. The match will only end when one gives up, is unconscious, is dead, or I step in. Naruto Uzumaki cannot use any chakra-based jutsu. Lastly, there must be no outside interferences. Failure to comply with these rules will result in automatic disqualification. Understood. Receiving 2 nods in acceptance, Anko raised her right hand above her head. First match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Sakura Haruno. Begin. Anko brought her hand down and jumped out of way to avoid the charging banshee that was Sakura Haruno. "Cha! I'm going to beat your face in for surpassing Sasuke-kun," she shrieked as she charged in with a sloppy left hook, intent on crushing his skull with a fraction of Tsunade's strength. Naruto remained stock still with that blank look on as Sakura closed the distance between the two. 10 meters. 5 meters. 2 meters. Cha! Sakura shouted as she swung her fist at the blonde. Naruto sidestepped to the right and delivered a hard elbow blow to the back of her neck, causing her to be temporarily stunned and hunch over as she lost her balance. Naruto then raised his right knee and struck right in the solar plexus, causing her gasp as her breath was robbed from her, as well as causing her to throw up her lunch. The pain was too much for the dieting, physically weak medic Nin and passed out, falling none too gracefully into a puddle of her vomit that smelled awful. Seeing that the pinkette was out for the count, Anko shouted, "Winner, Naruto Uzumaki." In the cage box. Seems like they were wrong. Onoki snorted as the other cages nodded in agreement as Sakura was taken off the field by stretcher bearers. Meanwhile, the captains of the United Whirlpool military were snickering at the match. They hadn't seen anything so pathetic in their lives. Even fresh soldiers fought better than that when they started training. Back in the arena, Naruto and Anko were sorting out the finer details of their date when they saw Ino approaching. When both of them were ready, Ino wanted to apologize for her and the others' treatment of him before his exile. "Naruto, before we start, I want to say we're all sorry about what we did to you before you were banished. Can you please forgive us for our foolishness?" Her response was for Naruto to close his eyes and sigh. To be honest, he didn't want to bring this up until after the fights, so he decided it was best to answer the girl with something along those lines. "Yamanaka-san, this is not the time, nor the place to be discussing this kind of sensitive topic. I will speak to you and the others when the fights are over," he replied as he got into his fighting. Withdrawing the stun knife that was sheathed horizontally on his lower back, he proceeded to stand with his right leg in front of his left, held the knife in the reversed grip in front of him along with an open left hand, and crouched slightly. Ino nodded and got into her family's stance as Anko came up to begin the battle. Second match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Ino Yamanaka. Begin. Ino threw several shuriken at the blonde before blurring through hand seals as she performed her clan's most famous jutsu, Shintenshin no Jutsu. Ino shouted, her hands in a triangle-like shape and aiming at her fellow blonde opposite her. Up in the competitor's box. "Damn it, Ino, that jutsu won't work." Shikamaru cursed as he facepalmed at her carelessness. "What do you mean?" Shoji questioned, who was munching on some crisps that he had brought with him. Shoji, that jutsu requires the target to be immobilized because of the backlashes it demands. In the beginning, her mind moves slowly and in a straight line, so all Naruto has to do is dodge to avoid being affected. Then as it takes time for her mind to return to her body, Naruto can walk right up to her prone form and it's game over for Ino. It's the reason why we have the Ino Shikacho trio, because it's our jobs to keep our targets from moving so she can get a clear shot. Shikamaru groaned as he took out a cigarette and lit it before taking a puff. Back in the arena. True enough, that is what exactly was happening, for as soon as Ino finished her jutsu, Naruto dive rolled to the right and ran straight to Ino's prone form. He then placed his stun knife at her neck and Anko decided to call the match. "Winner, Naruto Uzumaki." Anko shouted as many of the ninja from the other villages cheered for the good fight, whilst everyone from Konoha were still stunned as they couldn't realize that the man down there was the same teenager they mistreated 10 years ago. As Ino came to, it took her a moment to realize that she had lost. Getting up, she walked over to the exit. Just before exiting, she looked over her shoulder towards Naruto. "Naruto, promise you will speak with the Konoha 11 after this. We really want to apologize for what we did." "And I said yes, now go, we have another match to do," Naruto replied as Ino nodded and finally was out of his view, only to be replaced by a blushing Hinata. Once everyone was ready, Anko began the next fight. Third match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Hinata Hyuga. Begin. For a moment neither of them moved, until Naruto moved his hands to his shirt and started to remove it. "Phew. It's hot. In fact, it's so hot I need some more air," he said as his shirt was halfway off, causing a lot of females to blush at his toned abs and chiseled chest and many males to glare in jealously. "N Naruto-kun. H hot," Hinata muttered as she pressed her index fingers and tried to get rid of the blush on her face. Soon it was too much for shy and timid Hinata, and it was much worse as she started having perverted thoughts. The result was her blasting off from a geyser of a nosebleed and pass out from both blood loss and the impact from falling. Naruto smirked as he put his shirt back on as everyone else sweat dropped at the victory. At seeing everyone's faces he scowled. "Hey, not my fault she's weak against my physique," Naruto said as everyone was snapped out of their dazes. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki?" Enko asked uncertainly as she was also in a daze, but not from Hinata's loss. The stadium stayed quiet as Hinata was carried out of the arena as Tenten took her place. "They may have been beaten easily, but I can assure you that you'll break a sweat facing me," she stated boldly as she got into a fighting stance. "Good," was all Naruto said as he too got into a fighting stance. Fourth match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Tenten. "Begin," Enko shouted, this time jumping away as she knew Tenten's jutsu were of the widespread kind. Indeed, she was right. Almost as soon as she had began the fight, Tenten had already brought out her sealing scrolls and proceeded to unseal her weapons from them as they sailed at the ex-Konoha Shinobi. Unlike the others, Naruto was forced to dodge or deflect her weapons as they came flying at him from almost all directions, though it was easy for him to do so judging from the smirk on his face. "Good, get annoyed so that she uses that big scroll on her back. Then I can go on the offensive," he thought as he dodged a kunai that missed him by a centimeter. Tenten, though, was getting frustrated. She had thrown all kinds of weapons at him only for him to either dodge or deflect him with that strange knife of his. Upon looking at it, she knew it was a high-quality weapon and would have had stars in her eyes if she wasn't in the middle of fight right now. "Looks like I'm going to have to use that," she growled as she jumped on top of the farthest wall and took off the large scroll on her back. "Good, she's doing it," Naruto thought as he pulled out an M67 frag grenade and took off the safety pin but kept the safety lever on. Tenten threw the scroll overhead, shouted out one of her most powerful attack. Sogu Tensasi. The sky literally became black from all the tools raining down on Naruto, who finally let go of the safety lever and tossed it at where Tenten was following the barrage. Boom. The resounding explosion caused many to gawk at the power behind it. It was twice as powerful as an explosive tag. How on earth did Naruto design that? Was the general thought going through the cages and ninja, though there were plots of stealing the technology from a certain Raven, Pinkett and Council. But that wasn't the end of it. No, in fact the shock wave caused by the explosion caused the weapons to go flying off course, leaving Naruto fine in the middle of a circle, surrounded by Tenten's weapons. Speaking of Konoha's weapon mistress, Tenten lay unconscious on the floor with multiple burn and stab wounds caused from the heat and shrapnel from the grenade. As she was carried away, Anko let out a whoop of joy. "Finally, some actual fighting is happening. I was afraid Naruto-kun would be able to win this without even trying. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki." Anko shouted in joy as said blonde chuckled at her antics. "Cage box. It looks like Azukage Dono's military are competent. Wouldn't you agree, Tsuchikage Dono?" Mei specifically asked Onoki, who humphed and looked in another direction, though on the inside he was regretting his decision with every victory. Naruto's captains and wives were smirking at the complete awe shown to something they considered a minor tool. Imagine their surprise if they saw a nuke, was their general thought as each one laughed inwardly. Arena floor. "Damn, you're cutting through them like butter. Are you sure you're not cheating?" Enko mocked as Naruto laughed heartily at her. "No, Enko-chan, I can assure you that I am not cheating. The reason why I am winning is because I am mainly using tactics. Whereas most of the ninja today use flashy jutsu and have honor, I do not. To me it's about doing the job right, and the only time this won't happen is if civilians or hostages are involved, as I would focus on their safety, and unlike the hidden villages here, who make the shinobi look like heroes, all of my soldiers are taught both the good and bad about the military. They know that heroes are only made by the leaders when in fact all it was them defying the odds. Take the Yondaime Hokage for example. The possibility of winning against an army is small with one man, but with the Hiraishin he won against the odds and so he was named a hero. What they fail to realize though, that one man's hero is another man's villain. Whilst in Konoha he is seen as a hero because he saved a lot of Konoha ninja, in Iwa he is seen as a villain because of the Iwa ninja he slaughtered, causing pain for any loved ones or relatives back home. Naruto informed Anko as the next opponent, Shikamaru, turned up. "Troublesome, let's get this over with," he drawled out as both took fighting stances. Fifth match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Shikamaru Nara. Begin. For a minute or two neither combatant did anything until Naruto spoke up. "Hey Nara-san, You don't look like you want to be here, so why don't you just drop out? After all, you won't gain anything you could use. Naruto asked in rhetorical tone as he rolled his neck in preparation. Fine, I forfeit. As soon as the words processed through everyone's heads, they all face vaulted and started shouting obscenities at the lazy genius. Naruto and Enko were standing there with wide eyes and mouths open as they couldn't believe that actually worked. Oh okay, winner. Naruto Uzumaki. Enko stammered out as everyone continued to insult the Nara as he walked back to the Konoha 11. I can't believe that actually worked. I was only joking, I didn't think you would actually do it. Naruto quietly said. Both Proctor and combatant shook their heads to keep their focus on the topic at hand. Competitor's box. Shikamaru, you lazy ass, you didn't even try anything. Ino scolded Shikamaru as he gave her a blank look. If you had been looking more carefully, you would have seen that I had him trapped in my Kagemane no Jutsu. However, when he rolled his neck without me doing it first, I know my jutsu wouldn't even faze him. Ergo, no need to fight a match that would be too troublesome. Shikamaru intelligently spoke as he took another cigarette and lit as he gazed down to continue watching the fights, ignoring the looks being sent at him from the others. Down in the arena. You know, at the rate you're going at, we could schedule our date for as soon as this test finishes. Enko said as Naruto shrugged his shoulders in response. It was then that they spotted Shino coming down to begin his match. It's good to see you, Naruto-sama, after such a long time, Shino said monotonously whilst giving a small bow in respect. You too, Aburame-san. Naruto replied, mirroring Shino's bow as both took up their positions. Sixth match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Shino Aburame, begin. As soon as Enko had finished her announcement, insects started to fly towards Naruto, who remained still again as before. Up in the cage box. What is Azuka's Dono doing? Surely he knows that what he is doing is a great risk. Mei questioned as the other cages apart from the Tsunade nodded in agreement. Just because it is a large risk doesn't mean that it will fail, it means that the likelihood of success is small. Naruto, however, has proven that every single time this has happened to him, he pulled it off. Tsunade said as the others thought back on what they know of him. We said the same thing when we first saw him, but now look at him. He united all of our nations and peace has been achieved there. Unlike this place. Akio added, muttering at the end to only allow her companions to hear it, causing them to snicker slightly. With Naruto and Shino. Naruto waited until all of the insects covered him entirely. He then discreetly pushed the button on the stun knife to activate electrical shock to be initiated. On cue, all of the insects let out a loud screech as they burned, and Shino was too shocked to do anything against it as the surge traveled across them and back to him, shocking him as well. Soon it became too much and he collapsed from the pain, both physical from the electricity and the fact that his insect colony was almost destroyed. The crowds were once again stunned by the fight. They thought he couldn't use jutsu, but he hadn't used any chakra. Therefore, somewhere along the line he had found a way to use lightning without the need of chakra. It was shocking to say the least. The cages themselves were in the same state of mind. Many of them were just blank on the inside as they were still staring in awe at what had transpired. Naruto's group, though, were laughing internally at the looks everyone had. It seemed that they believed everything relied on chakra. Boy, were they in for a wake-up call. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. Damn, I'm bored having to repeat that. Enko ended complainingly. Don't worry, there's only 5 matches after that. I would like to treat you to a homemade dinner. Naruto said as Enko licked her lips in anticipation. Can I join? A voice questioned as the pair looked to see Choji appear in his samurai armor. Sorry Akamichi-san, that's for a date. Now let's begin. Naruto stated as he stood in his combat stance again. Choji nodded and did the same. 7th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Choji Akamichi, begin. Choji was about to start doing hand seals until he saw Naruto take out a ration bar and start eating. What are those? Choji asked in curiosity. Oh, just a protein bar, helps with conserving energy. Want one? Naruto finished, handing out one of the bars towards the unsuspecting Choji. Sure. Choji replied as he took one and ate it. As soon as the food touched his tongue, his eyes narrowed and his face turned a shade of green as he threw it away and started throwing up. He was too preoccupied with trying to keep his lunch that he didn't notice Naruto walk up to him and knock him out with a simple chop to the neck. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. What was that you used against him? Poison, Enko added as she finished announcing the winner. Grinning, Naruto brought up the ration bar that he had given Choji. Nope. The food was just horrible. You see, those were emergency food rations. They're kind of like the soldier pills, except it replenishes the body's energy instead of chakra. The problem with them, though, is that they taste terrible or tasteless. But hey, my men are trained to eat stuff like this until they can eat with a straight face like I did then. Naruto said as Anko took a bite from the one he had eaten. Almost immediately she spat it out again, making retching sounds, but not actually throwing up. Fuck, that's crap. This should be used for torturing people, not as an emergency food supply. She choked, throwing the pathetic excuse for food back to Naruto, who shrugged and finished it. This prompted Anko to make gagging noises to mock him, to which he returned with shaking his head with closed eyes and a small smile. Cage box. You know, if that kind of food can even make an Akamichi vomit, then I really don't want to try it, Gaara said in his usual monotone voice. The other cages agreed quickly, deducing the same as the K's cage. You're not the only ones, was the thought process of Naruto's group. Despite their experience and tolerability with the stuff, it still tasted horrible. Arena. Hey Naruto, good to see you again, buddy. Arf, Kiba and Akamaru said simultaneously as they both stood opposite Anko and Naruto, who were discussing some everyday things about their lives. Naruto though looked blankly at the pair before he spoke in a rather cold tone. Inuzuka-san, do not speak to me in a friendly tone. After what you and some others did, you have no right to address me in such a familiarity voice. If you must address me, it will be either Uzumaki-sama or Azukage-sama. Now let's begin the match. Both of his opponents flinched at his statement, but got into fighting stances nonetheless, indicating that they were ready. 8th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Kiba Inuzuka. Begin. Kiba took out a soldier pill and tossed it to Akamaru, who swallowed it and his fur started turning red. Giju Ninpo. Shikyaku no Jutsu. Kiba yelled as he started to gain more canine attributes which were essential for using his clan's taijutsu. Flashing through hand seals, he got down on all fours as a chakra aura started to show. When he finished them, he was now surrounded by chakra-like flames as he called out his next jutsu. Akamaru then disappeared in a poof of smoke, only to be replaced with an exact twin of Kiba. He was also in the same all-fours position as the original. This trick again. Come on, this is going to be boring. Although I don't want to push my luck since I am only wearing standard gear here and not my customized gear. That does remind me. I need to check in with Gunsmith and see if my order is completed. I don't like that 5.7 I carried when I first arrived. Though I admit it is a good gun, it just doesn't suit my style, and this Beretta M9 doesn't even compare to what I ordered. Naruto thought as he stared off into the distance with a bored look on him. Upon seeing how bored Naruto was, Kiba exploded. Fuck, what's up with you? Don't ignore me, he shouted as he snapped Naruto out of his daze. Oh, it's just you, Inuzuka-san. Could you please not yell? I'm trying to think here. Naruto dismissed as he was intentionally doing it in order to enrage Kiba. It appeared to be working as both Kibases frowned deeply at the dismissal Naruto gave them. We'll show you not to underestimate us. Jujin Taijutsu Ogi. Gatsuga. The original Kiba yelled as both lunged at Naruto whilst transforming into miniature tornadoes that would rip anything that touched them to shreds. Naruto smirked as he took out the pin to the smoke grenade and dropped it on the floor, causing a gray cloud of smoke to fill the arena, blocking everyone's view in the process. Cage box. Why would Naruto do that? I read the reports of his Chunin exam preliminary match and it said Kiba did the same thing and almost won because of it. What does he gain from giving Kiba the advantage? Tsunade said as the other cages looked to her in confusion before looking back to fight in the arena. Arena. Huh. This what you come up with? Man, you must still be the dead last if you think this will work. I mean, how can you forget what happened at the Chunin exams? I'll still find you, Kiba said as he used his enhanced senses to locate Naruto from within the smoke. With the Konoha 11. Why is Naruto making a rookie mistake of allowing Kiba to easily find him when he is relying on sight mostly? Ino asked as the rest of the Konoha 11, minus Shikamaru, nodded in agreement. Sighing, Shikamaru decided to re-enlighten them on how Naruto has been fighting so far. This is too troublesome to say, but look back on how Naruto's been fighting his matches presently, he said as the others thought about what he meant. It was Neji who answered him. He has been using deception, Neji said. Nodding towards the Hyuga, Shikamaru continued. Right, so don't assume he is being stupid because whatever he did it for a purpose, he stated as the others looked back towards the fighting arena. The smoke was clearing and Kiba could clearly see Naruto, but now he was wearing a gas mask and his thermal goggles, not that he knew that. What the fuck's that? Kiba demanded as he heard a muffled chuckle come from Naruto. Well, Kiba, this is known as a gas mask, and what it does is allow me to breathe in a cloud of poison gas, which just so happens to have been the cloud we were in just a moment ago, Naruto informed Kiba in a slightly cheerful voice. But neither Akamaru or I could smell anything in the smoke. Kiba protested, getting a nod along with the transformed Akamaru. In response, Naruto spread his arms out in a kind of, I don't give a crap, look. Doesn't matter to me. I'm safe with this mask on and you should be feeling the effects of the poison. Right. About. Now, Naruto stated. As soon as the words passed his lips, Kiba immediately felt his right arm fall limp and go numb. He couldn't move it no matter how much effort he put into moving the limb. Fuck, he's right. Kiba whispered to his partner, who whined in worry. I can give you the antidote if you surrender and forfeit the match, or you can continue to try and win and I will keep avoiding you until you drop dead and I win anyway. So which will it be? Naruto asked, trying to keep any humor out of his voice. To many who knew Naruto from Konoha, this was surprising considering they believed that he would never try to kill a comrade. Though many who personally knew Naruto believed that even though it was unlikely, it wouldn't be surprising, especially with what happened before he was thrown out of Konoha. Thinking over his options, Kiba decided to not risk and raised his hand. I forfeit, he reluctantly said as Akamaru transformed back into his original form. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki, Anko announced, though nobody applauded because although the match was over, the case of Kiba's poisoning was still their main concern. Well, give me the antidote, quickly before the poison kills us, Kiba yelled as Akamaru barked in agreement. Naruto then gave a sheepish grin. There isn't any. What? Kiba shouted, angry that he was tricked and would die for it. Naruto, seeing this, decided to explain before there was a stadium-wide panic. There was no poison either. I used the first rule for ninja, deception. I convinced you that the smoke was poisonous and that I was safe because of the gas mask, when in reality all it was a large smoke bomb. But what about his arm? Anko asked as she too was curious about how Naruto made Kiba's arm numb. Naruto then pulled out a small syringe with the word, morphine, written on it. This is known as morphine. It is used for treating battle wounds that are gained in a fight. When someone is wounded, the pain is numbed by injecting this into the opposite limb to where the wound is. It then nullifies the pain receptors around the wound so that the brain doesn't register the wound there. This way men don't shout out in pain and give away their location and don't die from shock, but the downside is that the whole limb is numbed to the point of being useless. I injected it into you when you were in a rage in the smoke so that you didn't register it. I found you in the smoke by using my thermal goggles. Points to the goggles on his head, to track your heat signature. Naruto finished explaining. Many of the medic nin and doctors were looking on in awe at the medical tool. They could really use that to allow patients relief from the pain they endure when out on missions. Tsunade herself wondered if it would be possible to arrange a trade for them. The other cages were along similar lines, though more for what Naruto used it for in combat. After all, being able to make an enemy collapse from numbness would help them a great amount. With the Konoha 11. See, told Ya he had something cooked up. This whole thing has become too troublesome if you ask me. Shikamaru said as he finished his latest smoke. The Dobi's been lucky, so what? He won't beat me in Uchiha Elite. Was the arrogant Uchiha's statement, which caused all the other occupants Shikamaru, Lee and Neji to glare at him. Knowing he was outnumbered, Sasuke scoffed and went back to scowling at the blonde Azukage as Lee made his way down to the arena. What is it you plan on cooking for me, Naruto-kun? Anko cooed as gave Naruto an innocent look that most men were unable to resist. Keyword being most. Anko-chan, I'll tell you later, but I think Lee-san would like for the match to start. Naruto said as Lee gave him his signature, good guy, pose. Yes, I do believe we should begin this youthful match between two youthful fighters. If I can't win, then I will do 200 laps of Konoha. If I can't do that, I will do 400 push-ups, and if I can't do... Shut up. We know already. Everybody shouted towards Lee as everyone knew to cut him off before he and Guy did their most dangerous genjutsu. Hugging each other on the beach during a sunset. Lee blushed from embarrassment before he stood in his ideal fighting stance, the Goken. Naruto withdrew his stun knife and once again took up his combat stance. Anko, seeing that both of them were ready, raised her hand. 9th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Rock Lee. Begin. Lee leapt at Naruto with med-jonin speed and threw a fast right jab that Naruto ducked under. Lee was about to aim a kick but was surprised when he felt Naruto stab his knife into his right calf. He vaguely saw Naruto press a button on the knife until his whole world suffered from pain and from the same electric shock that Shino had received, but got the full power of it rather than a diluted version that Shino got due to him being in direct contact with the knife. Soon the pain was too much and he passed out. Winner. Naruto Uzumaki. Anko said as cheers came from many of the foreign shinobi present and boos from the Konoha residents. I know the fight with Lee was disappointing, but I couldn't find any names for the techniques he used, so I wanted to wrap his match up quickly. Both Anko and Naruto rolled their eyes at the Konoha residents and wondered how the negotiations were going to go if Konoha had a mindset like this as a whole. As Lee was carried off and out of the clearing, Neji took his place and got into his Juken without even speaking a word and activated his Byakugan. He knew that Naruto was not in a speaking mood for the Konoha 11, especially those who abused him before he was thrown out of Konoha. His aim so far was to beat Naruto in this fight. Once Naruto was ready as well, Anko decided to start the second to last match. 10th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Neji Hyuga, begin. Almost immediately Neji lunged with a Juken strike to Naruto's right shoulder, to which Naruto sidestepped and both began a series of taijutsu blows, blocks, dodges, counterblocks and counterattacks. To the audience it was astounding that Naruto was facing down one of the most effective taijutsu with little to no effort being needed. Neji was getting annoyed as his prized Juken was completely obsolete against the blonde who dodged or deflected all of his attempts to shut down his chakra network. How is he doing this? The Juken is supposed to be one of the most prized taijutsu style, and this man is easily avoiding it, and he isn't even using any jutsu, just that knife and taijutsu. Neji thought as he made one last effort to Juken strike his stomach, only for Naruto curve around his outstretched palm and landed a punch to his head, causing him to stagger slightly. That's another thing, his punches are even more powerful than Lee's. If it wasn't for the fact that Naruto was banished, I would have thought Tsunade taught him her super strength, he mentally added. Naruto meanwhile was waiting for Neji to pull a certain stance that would give him the opportunity to counter and end the match. During all of this he kept one of his hands close to the assortment grenades he had as the fight dragged out. A couple of minutes later Neji was getting agitated, decided to use something from the Chunin exams as he jumped a few yards away before he got into a different stance that all the Hyuga recognized right away. Naruto though mentally grinned as he saw the stance. Now to put my plan into action, he thought as he reached to back of his belt and grabbed something that went unnoticed by everyone else. You are within my range of divination. Hake Hyaku Naijahachi Sho, Neji called out as he charged at the blonde Azukage. Only to see a small device being thrown right into his view, he quickly glanced at Naruto, to see him closing his eyes and covering his ears. Instinctively he did the same, but two things prevented this. Firstly, he forgot to deactivate his Byakugan, and secondly, he didn't cover his ears in time. The result was for him to be blinded by a large flash and to go deaf from a loud bang that ringed through his ears. It didn't help that the Byakugan enhanced his vision quality, so he felt the effects more than a normal person would. Falling back from seeing white and being slightly deaf, he wasn't aware of Naruto's fist smashing into his face, sending him skidding a few feet away before he was unconscious. Naruto grinned as he pulled his fist back to his side. What happened there, Naruto-kun? I saw a flash and heard a loud bang, then I see Neji knocked out. Anko asked, cradling her head slightly to steady herself. Well, you see. When Neji charged at me, I threw what is called a flashbang. It temporarily blinds and deafens the enemy to disorientate them. Thanks to this I got an opening, and all it took was a hard punch to put him out. Naruto explained as Anko laughed at the grin he was showing. Fuck, you're good at this shit. Anyway, one more and then we go on our date, Anko said as they saw the last of the Konoha 11 come down. When Sasuke came out onto the field, he still had that cocky smirk of his he always wore when he was convinced that he would win. He had his arms folded over his chest as he casually walked into the arena with an air of arrogance surrounding him. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the sight of the man that had caused him to be thrown out of Konoha. Though I think I should thank him for that, as I did find a better place to go to and marry my two wives, Naruto thought as he went to stand next to Anko. In his mind he heard Kurama growl at the Uchiha. That waste of space. Kid, do me a favor and humiliate that bastard. I still have a bone to pick with that damn clan, especially after what Madara did to me both when he was facing that Senju and Namikaze. Kurama angrily said as he saw through Naruto's eyes the Uchiha flare his Sharingan. When the Konoha villagers and ninja saw the legendary Sharingan, they all cheered and praised him. On the outside Sasuke looked like he wasn't paying attention, but Naruto knew that all of the time he had known the Ravenhead he always wanted attention, and that right now he was mentally grinning. So Dobi, ready to lose to me again as like all the other times? He mocked as many others laughed at Naruto, thinking that it would make him do something rash and be disqualified. Yet I was the one to bring you back to Konoha, Uchiha-san. Please spare me any unsavory comments and let's begin, Naruto said as he moved his hand towards his stun knife again, and he was about to grab it when Sasuke decided otherwise. Don't you dare insult me, an Uchiha elite. I bet the Yondaime and his wife didn't even want you, considering they died just to get away from you. They didn't want to live with a demon, so they killed themselves. Ha, ha. Sasuke laughed as many of the Konoha residents laughed as well, whilst the foreigners believed that that was uncalled for but didn't say anything. Naruto bowed his head slightly so that his hair obscured his eyes from view, and his right hand that was reaching for his stun knife redirected itself to take out the Beretta M9 and held it in front of him. He then used his left hand to pull the slide back to see that a round was chambered. Releasing the slide, he took the safety off and stood in position. This time though it was different. It was more casual, with his legs being slightly apart and his hands by his sides. Cage box. Uchiha-san should not have done that, Yugito stated as the other cages turned towards her. What do you mean? Tsunade asked, as even though she disliked the Uchiha, it was still her duty to look after him as well as all her other ninja, both as the Hokage and a medic nin. It's because of the weapon Naruto has now drew. Fu added as the cages looked to her now, looking for more information. Seeing that she now had their attention, Fu decided to continue. You see, when he was tortured by people who he trusted a lot and prayed would stand by him in his moment of need. Tsunade winced at that. Something in him broke. Fu drew out at the end. And because of that, Naruto developed a mental mode called Killer Mode. What it means is that he loses all other thoughts and goes into a kind of trance. No love, happiness or kindness. In fact, there isn't even any negative emotions like anger or rage. All there is one thing: kill. At one point Naruto was outnumbered by enemies, and to combat them he entered this mode, and let's just say it made the Uchiha massacre look tame. Yugito finished for Fu as the cages turned back to look at Naruto more closely. Arena. When Yugito and Fu finished their explanation, Naruto lifted his head to stare right into Sasuke's Sharingan eyes. Sasuke himself was starting to doubt himself when he looked into Naruto's eyes. His half-lidded eyes were dead, looking as if there was no life left in them. His face didn't show any expression, just as blank as a fresh canvas. His hair caused shadows to appear over his eyes, making his posture even more deathly. Inwardly shivering, Sasuke drew his tanto in his right hand and stood in his kenjutsu stance. The two stared at each other, one with a deathly gaze and one with a slightly nervous but arrogant gaze. Seeing that the two ready, Anko started the match. 11th match. Naruto Uzumaki vs Sasuke Uchiha, begin. As if one cue, Sasuke weaved through numerous hand seals, whilst Naruto just stood there, not reacting at all to the danger being presented. After Sasuke had finished making hand seals, he brought his left hand to his mouth and took a deep breath. Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu, he called out as he released a large fireball, twice his height, at the rooted Azukage. When the fireball connected, it exploded and scorched the earth around it. Many people started to cheer, thinking that Naruto had been caught in the flames, to which Sasuke forgot about his initial fear, smirked smugly and turned off his Sharingan. After a few seconds he didn't hear Anko call him the winner, and the cheers from before had died down. Upon closer inspection he saw that they were ones of shock, and they were intentionally looking behind him. What are they so shocked about? He thought as he rose an eyebrow in confusion and turned around to see what they staring at. Only to find himself looking down the barrel of Naruto's M9. Bang. Ah! Sasuke shouted as he dropped his tanto so that he could cover his left eye, which now had a hole in it and was bleeding profusely. In reality that would have blown a hole through his skull, but because of his instincts Sasuke was able to make the bullet go diagonally through his eye and out the side of his head before it hit anything else important. As soon as he fell to the ground, Naruto pressed the M9 against his forehead with that same dead look about him, as if it didn't matter to him that he had just blew a person's eye out. Naruto pulled the hammer back, ready to fire another round directly into his brain, and was in the process of squeezing the trigger but paused when he heard Anko shout out to him. Naruto-kun, stop. You won all right. No need to go any further, Anko yelled as Naruto registered what she said and stopped within seconds of killing the Uchiha. Sasuke opened his only working eye to see Naruto's expression come back to reality, though he still had a cold expression on. Naruto relaxed his grip from pulling the trigger and pulled the hammer back into place, before putting it back into its holster and walking off towards the changing rooms. Asshole! He muttered as he passed the Uchiha without even looking at him as the medic nin came and tried to heal his eye. He then looked at Anko and gave her a small smile to reassure her that he was fine. I'll pick you up after the negotiations for our date, Anko-chan, he said cheerfully as Anko nodded back with a grin as she decided to finish the tournament. Winner of the tournament, Naruto Uzumaki. Many of the foreigners cheered loudly, including the captains and privates, whilst the Konoha residents kept quiet as they were inwardly fuming that the demon won. The cages themselves were shocked, though Onoki was more like sweating as he knew what that meant. Uzushiogakure was now under the UWN's control and not theirs, all because of his stubbornness. As Naruto walked into the changing rooms, he absently thought of what the negotiations would be like. Most likely a pain in the ass, he thought as took off his helmet and started changing. If only he knew how right he was. Naruto stared at the ceiling to his hotel room, clad in his armor and white and orange trench coat. He looked like he was paying attention to the detail of the room when he was actually in deep thought about the talks. Specifically about the Tsuchikage. The man had no respect for anybody who was younger than himself, and it had been for this reason that there had been no mention of a Yondaime Tsuchikage at all. His reputation of being Ryodanban no Onoki meant that he was quick to switch sides from one another, and that made him a very dangerous man when picking as an ally, especially when it came to trusting him. He'll definitely try and gain something out of me, that's guaranteed. Naruto thought grimly with a frown. Kid, I don't like this just as much as you, but I wouldn't worry much about that senile old man. Remember, you won that bet fair and square. The cages cannot afford to lose the UWN and so should give you Uzushiogakure as promised. Though it was already yours by birth. Kurama mentally added, trying to reassure his partner so that he would stop worrying over things too much. By focusing too much on one thing he would become oblivious to everything else, something that a leader mustn't fall into. I know, but still I can't help but feel a headache coming on soon. Naruto mentally replied to his tenant as he stood up and stretched his muscles, causing his joints to pop into place. He yawned as he walked over to his equipment laying nearby. Picking up his sidearms, which were in his holsters, he tied them around his hips securely to stop them from falling down. Next he placed his Colt M4A1 Sopmod on his back by the strap. His stun knife was on his lower back from his fights with Konoha 11, and his sword was attached to his left hip. Placing his right index and middle fingers to his right ear, Naruto activated his codec to get in contact with his wives and captains. Azukage-sama, was the simultaneous replies from his generals and captains. Everyone meet me in front of the hotel at 1100 hours. That will be when we will go to our meeting with the cages. Naruto ordered as he heard numerous confirmations through his codec. When everyone had confirmed his orders, he took his fingers away from his codec and glanced at the clock opposite the bed. 9:30 a.m., it showed, meaning he had an hour and a half until he met up with the others of his group. I could use some breakfast, he thought absently as a particular ramen stand came to mind. Over the course of his banishment he had learned to not constantly eat the stuff, but he could have it as a treat since he was eating more healthily. So whilst he would eat normal food just as much as everyone else, he still loved to have ramen from time to time, and that time was now. Plus he would be able to tell Tucci and Ayame about his offer to move to the UWN in person, as it seemed more polite than sending a message. Shutting and locking the door to his room, he made his way towards Ichiraku ramen stand. Konoha streets. It would appear that nothing has changed since my banishment. Naruto thought as he knew the villagers were either glaring at him or whispering insults, thinking he couldn't hear them. Ka-chan, what's that armor that guy is wearing? Never you mind Toshiro-kun. Just stay away from him, he'll only lead you to your death. Oh okay Ka-chan. Naruto sighed as he heard the small conversation between the mother and her son. Truth be told, he wanted nothing more than to go there, chew out the mother and tell the kid otherwise, but a couple of things stopped him. Firstly, he couldn't afford to cause any trouble at the moment, and secondly, despite his feelings, he didn't want to cause a rift between the mother and her son, especially since he mentally saw himself and Kushina in their places. Though he was pretty sure his Ka-chan wouldn't have been as cruel as this woman was if she was warning him about someone. Soon he saw the familiar stand that he had visited in his childhood and had a small flashback of the first time he came here with the Sandame when he was about 6 years old. Pushing the flaps to allow him entry, he saw that the stand was mostly empty except for Tucci, who had his back to him as he tended to the food. He took a seat on one of the stools and looked to see that the stand hadn't changed at all since his banishment. Well, you have, Tucci said in a bored-toned voice, with his back still facing him. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the unusual behavior. As far as he knew, Tucci always greeted his customers with a cheery attitude, but now that he thinks about it, Tucci and his daughter could very well have been affected badly by his banishment, so it wasn't completely a surprise that Tucci wasn't very friendly. One miso ramen please, Naruto asked. Tucci froze for a moment before as he recognized that voice. Ever so slowly he turned around slowly to see Naruto sitting there with his arms crossed and with a smirk plastered on as he watched Tucci in amusement. "En Naruto?" Tucci stuttered as the blonde's smirk widened slightly. "Hey old man, how ya been?" Naruto asked as the man looked close to tears. Tucci was indeed close to crying in joy at seeing his favorite customer. When the man and his daughter heard the news that Naruto was being banished, they immediately tried to visit him, but as they arrived at the prison they saw some of Naruto's comrades leaving writhed smiles or smirks that didn't please the pair. They were denied entrance, and when they asked for an explanation they were told that only Shinobi could visit Shinobi criminals. They knew the man was lying, but they couldn't force their way through, and they couldn't ask the Hokage as his banishment was scheduled for the same day. The time it would have taken to gain entrance would be too long from the constant blocks the civilians would try to put up. In the end, all they could do was watch in sadness as Naruto ran as fast as he could away from them until he was no longer visible to them, having ran too far for them to see them. Almost as soon as he was no longer visible, the villagers started to celebrate, glad that he was gone. From then on, both Tucci and Ayame were cold to anyone who badmouthed Naruto. There was even a case where someone insulted Naruto's parents, which resulted in Ayame discreetly putting laxatives in the person's food. The Konoha 11 were also treated coldly, even those who had nothing to do with Naruto's banishment. The reason being that even though they didn't treat him horribly while he was in prison, they did constantly get on his case for even the minor of things when he was with them in both the academy and when they were made genin. Naruto, my boy. How are you here though? I thought you weren't allowed back in Konoha. Not that I mind or anything. Tucci quickly added at the end in the hopes of not insulting the man. Naruto waved off the accidental insult. It was a legitimate question since he didn't know of his current status. No worries, old man. The reason I'm here is because the Shinobi Alliance can't handle one village and one criminal organization, so they decided to try and get my nation involved so that they survive this war that Akatsuki started. Naruto explained with extra emphasis on the "my" in his response. Tucci was stunned to say the least. He knew that the Shinobi Alliance was losing the war and that they were in meetings with United Whirlpool Nation's leader, but the emphasis on the "my" made it sound like, "You're the Azuka, aren't you?" The nod in response confirmed it as the two shared stories and Naruto had his ramen. Naruto told Tucci about how he untied the West to form the United Whirlpool Nation, and Tucci filled Naruto in on how his life was during Naruto's banishment. After an hour had passed, the two finally stopped and Naruto thought it best he give Tucci his offer before he left to meet with the rest of his group outside the hotel. "Say, old man, I was wondering if you considered moving to somewhere else?" Tucci scratched his chin in thought as he mulled the idea over. If he was honest with himself, he did think about moving ever since Naruto was banished, but had decided against it because of the dangers of bandits, possibly ninja, and the trouble of setting up shop at their new location. "I have considered it, but there would have been dangerous people out there that we could run into, as well as the problems we would face of getting started in selling that made it impossible for us to move," he replied. "Well then, how about this? I will take care of everything that you would need to move to the UWN, and in return you give me a discount from time to time," Naruto offered as Tucci thought the offer over. After a couple of seconds, Tucci gave Naruto his reply. "Okay Naruto, you got yourself a deal, and I will tell Ayame of this when she comes back from picking up some supplies. That reminds me, she really missed you as well, and I'm pretty sure that she would love to see you again after so long," Tucci said as Naruto nodded in return. "All right, I talked to her later on as my group, and I will be going back to our headquarters after our meeting with the cages. Before then, pack all of the essentials that you need and head to the Hokage Monument, where I will meet up with you there. After that we will send you to the UWN, where for the time being you will be living as guests at my home. Then we will set you up with the resources you will need. I am pretty sure that business will be fruitful considering you were some of the only people to treat me with kindness when I was in Konoha," Naruto informed the chef. He was glad that the man was coming back with him to the UWN. It was also easier that they were civilians, since the cages could not interfere with civilian affairs and the civilians could not hold them in Konoha unless they were being charged with a crime with valid evidence. It would seem that the civilians' efforts to be in control of Konoha by stating that civilians were under their complete control were actually working in his favor now. It was then that he noticed that it had been hours since Ayame had gone to get supplies for the ramen stand. What could be taking her so long? She wasn't the kind of person to allow anything to interrupt her when she was working. So that meant either she was having trouble with getting the supplies before she could leave, or someone has stopped her mid-journey. Taking the necessary ryo out to pay for the meal, he laid the money on table before addressing Tucci. "I'll see you later, old man, and remember only essentials. We can only take so much before it becomes a danger," Naruto reminded Tucci as the man nodded and waved him goodbye, to which he responded in turn with a smile. The Huis did have a maximum weight load, and carrying 2 extra people in their luggage may weigh the helicopters too much. However, as soon as he had gone past the flaps, his expression turned cold as ran off towards the route that Ayame took when picking up supplies, hoping his fear was wrong. Minutes later. "Ah!" Ayame shouted as she was forced to sit down against the wall in an alleyway, her work clothes ripped to the point that it barely covered her body. She had numerous bruises, cuts and scratches inflicted on her from her attackers, who towered above her with looks of unrestrained lust. There were 3 of them altogether. They were all civilians, and despite that, Ayame was still outnumbered, and as she wasn't a ninja she couldn't fight them. It was then that the leader of them took a step towards her as the others held her down. "Relax, you'll love this, demon whore," the leader said as he pulled his pants and underwear off. "And no," Ayame begged through her split lip, as the leader ripped her panties away. She started to hyperventilate and started to slowly lose conscious. All of her time alive she had wished that Naruto would be the one to take her virginity, not some civilian pigs. "Shut up, bitch," the leader growled as he was about to penetrate the bound girl. Bang. "Gah!" the leader yelled as he fell down on his back, clutching his crotch as blood flowed out at the speed of a waterfall. When the other thugs saw what had happened to their leader, they turned towards where they heard the sound come from and saw Naruto there, his killer mode on and his 5-7 in his outstretched right hand, which was smoking slightly from the discharge of the bullet. "It's the demon, run!" one of the other thugs shouted as he and the other uninjured thug ran down the alleyway, away from Naruto as fast as they could in an effort to get away. Bang 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 bang. Both thugs fell to ground holding onto both of their kneecaps as the bullets shattered them from behind them, rendering them permanently crippled and in a lot of pain. Upon impact they all shouted in pain again, though Naruto ignored them and walked towards the barely conscious Ayame, turning his killer mode off in the process. When Ayame saw Naruto coming towards her, she firstly thought it was another rapist and started to tremble. However, when she recognized him, she let out a small smile. Naruto," Ayame whispered in relief as her eyes rolled up and fainted. Sighing, Naruto took off his trench coat, crouched down and wrapped it around Ayame's form. When Ayame felt the coat around her, she instinctively pulled it tighter to her to keep her warm. Once she was comfortable, Naruto stood up straight and activated his codec. "Calling all call signs, change of plans. Captain Kyoto, take 2 guards and rendezvous with me at the hospital. Prepare for medical condition number 0198721. 3 of the bodyguards will arrest the 3 wounded civilians at these coordinates. Punches in his location, and take them to the Hokage's tower. All other captains and generals are to take the rest of the guards and proceed to the Hokage's tower as well, where Generals Yugito and Fu are to then call a meeting along with the other cages. Everyone else will continue with their previous orders. Confirm?" "Sir, yes sir," was the response. Taking his fingers off the communicative device, Naruto walked back to Ayame and picked her up bridal style. Looking over the thugs, he saw that they weren't going to be going anywhere, so decided not to restrain them as his soldiers should be arriving soon. Then he disappeared, leaving an after image as he made his way to Konoha's hospital. "Konoha's hospital, minutes later. We're here to look for Azukage-sama. He told us that he brought a patient here for us to treat," Inoue said as she and her 2 bodyguards addressed the receptionist with blank expressions. The receptionist glared at them with hatred as she spoke back in barely contained venom. "The demon and the demon-loving whore are in room 201. Now get the hell a move on so that I can deal with normal human patient requests," she sneered. If Inoue was offended, she didn't show it. Instead, she nodded back with a neutral expression to the receptionist and walked past her and made her way to the designated room, leaving the receptionist to wonder why they didn't retaliate to her insults. After walking for a few minutes, the group eventually made it to room 201 and proceeded to open the slide door. When she opened it, she saw Naruto standing at the end of the bed staring at the unconscious Ayame, who lay in the hospital bed. She was dressed in a hospital gown and was covered up to the neck by the bedsheets. "Azukage-sama. Is this the patient?" Inoue saluted her commanding officer along with her bodyguards following her. Naruto didn't even turn to look at the trio as he responded in a kind of trance-like tone. "At ease, and yes, this is the patient. At roughly 1030 hours, Ayame Ichiraku here was nearly raped by 3 civilians in an alleyway where they also inflicted wounds on her for resisting. She has received numerous cuts, scratches, bruises, and she is dehydrated from crying in the heat. They never got to actually do the deed, but I didn't want to take any chances. She also fainted at the end of the ordeal. Please do what you can for her and do not let anyone aside from our group, Tsunade or her father, into this room. Anybody who tries to force their way is considered an enemy and you have the right to use lethal force. Understood?" "Yes, Azukage-sama," Inoue replied with conviction as Naruto nodded and vanished, with an after image being left for a few seconds before vanishing also. She knew that Naruto cared about the girl as he had mentioned her a few times as he told them about his past in Konoha when he met them, and that now he was barely containing his rage as he left. After she was sure that Naruto had left, she turned towards her 2 bodyguards. "You 2 guard the door," she ordered. "Yes, Captain Kyoto," they replied simultaneously as they walked outside the door to keep a lookout to make sure that nobody interrupted her unless it was urgent or if any of the previously mentioned people turned up and wanted to see the girl. Once they were gone, Inoue then turned back to look at the unconscious Ayame. "All right, let's see what we can do here," she said rhetorically as she took out her medic kit and started to tend to the girl's afflictions. Hokage Tower. Council Chamber. The room was darkened with no windows and lights were used for lighting. In the center of the room was a large circle table that was able to accommodate the cages, Naruto's group and the council. "That demon should be executed," one civilian council member shouted, with the others shouting in agreement. The Shinobi council members all shook their heads in annoyance as they heard that demand for the who knows how long time. Along with them were the cages, who were talking amongst themselves, and Naruto's group were doing the same as the cages. A moment later they saw Naruto appear, scaring the shit out of both councils and the cages. "Azukage Dono, are we ready to start the negotiations?" Tsunade asked, hoping to get them to begin talking. "Nope," was Naruto's unexpected answer. In response, he was on the end of numerous outbursts from the civilians, Shinobi and some of the cages. "Why not?" demanded as he was about to use his Raiden no Yoroi on him. Seeing this, Naruto put his right hand up to signal for silence. A moment later everyone was quiet and were now listening intently to him for an explanation. What I mean is that there is one more thing that is needed to be discussed before we start the negotiations. This is because as I was making my way here after stopping for some breakfast I came across the sight of one Ayame Ichiraku about to be raped by 3 Konoha civilians. In response I incapacitated them and brought Miss Ichiraku to the hospital where she is now being treated by Captain Kyoto. Naruto ground out as the civilians were in uproar. Lies. Our Konoha villagers would never do such a thing, though her being associated with you is a good enough reason to do so. Another civilian member shouted with nods of agreement from the other members. Oh really? Then how do you explain this? Naruto questioned as he activated the hologram projector that was hidden in his helmet. A small light shone from the helmet and showed the scene of the attempted rape to the audience against the bare wall. The Cages, Naruto's group and the Shinobi council members were disgusted at seeing the attempted rape, although the Cages and Shinobi were also taking note of Naruto's hologram projector. When Naruto came and dealt with the culprits they winced slightly as they knew how much pain they were in. The civilians though were furious and were demanding that Naruto be punished for using excessive force or saying the proof wasn't good enough. Oh, I thought the punishment for rape was execution. And how can you sit there, see that crime as if you were there and then say no crime was committed? Naruto rebuked as the civilians went quiet for the moment. Tsunade seeing this stood up as it was her responsibility to give out punishments. Well, seeing as it is clear that those 3 civilians are guilty they will be imprisoned for life and given a session with Ibiki. Normally they would be executed but due to the fact that the deed wasn't actually done I can't do that, so this is what they get instead. Tsunade said the civilians were yelling again in protest, saying that they shouldn't be punished at all. Quiet. Tsunade shouted, using ki to shut them up. It was then the doors burst open and in flew the 3 mentioned civilians as they were thrown through the doors by 3 of Naruto's group bodyguards, hands cuffed behind their backs. As the 3 attempted to sit up their arresters used the stock of their Colt M16A2 rifles to hit them in the back of the neck, causing them to fall flat on their stomachs. Prisoners escorted to location, sir. One of the soldiers reported as he and the 2 others saluted their commanding officer. At ease and thank you. Now continue with your original duty of defending the captains. Naruto said as they responded with a confirmation before marching to stand by the captains and other generals. Naruto then turned back to Tsunade and addressed her. Hokage Dono, personally I do not like your decision, but they fall under your jurisdiction so I have no choice but to hand them over to you. He said with a slight frown since he was upset about the punishment. Tsunade summoned a few Anbu to take them to Ibiki, the criminals shouting in protest as they were roughly dragged out of the room and causing more pain in the areas from where they were shot. After they were gone Tsunade thought it best that the negotiations began. Okay, if there are no more problems can we begin these talks? Nodding back to her Naruto strode over to his group and took a seat next to his wives. When it looked like everyone was ready Mifune decided to begin. Okay, now that we are all here this second meeting between the Shinobi Alliance and the United Whirlpool Nation. As before I will act as mediator, you may begin. Mifune said as he took his seat again. First of all I would like everyone here to hold up their side of the bargain and that Uzushiogakure is now under the permanent jurisdiction of the United Whirlpool Nation. Naruto began as many of those present hoped he had forgotten about that. The nation was rich in resources that made Hai no Kuni a very rich country and the land was very good for strategic maneuverings. To give it away would be a very hard blow to the Shinobi Alliance, especially Konoha. Knowing that they had no right to retain Uzushiogakure as their own, Tsunade made the announcement. Very well, Uzushiogakure and all of its resources are hereby under the ownership of the U. I say no. Onoki interrupted Tsunade as many of the occupants of the room stared in shock at what the Tsuchikage was doing. Excuse me? Naruto said in a low tone as his eyes narrowed. You heard me. I will not give up a strategic point to some young idiot who leads a nation whose inhabitants cannot even use chakra. Onoki declared as everyone fell silent. The room had become so quiet that if a pin dropped it would be as loud as a kunai hitting the ground. Is that so, you senile old shit stain? Everyone, minus Naruto's group, mouths open in shock as they heard the insult pass through Naruto's lips with his hair covering his eyes. Sure, in the past Cages would indirectly insult each other, but never did they actually openly say it. The effect was shown as the Tsuchikage turned red from anger and flew up so that he was average height. He then glared at the Azukage with as much hate as he could. How dare you say such things, you ungrate, click. The Tsuchikage's eyes widened in fright as he was now looking down the barrel of one of Naruto's 5.7s. Naruto's expression showed a scowl in place, directed at the man who was at the end of his firearm. Naruto was indeed angry. This man was about to back out of a deal that had already been made. Are you sure? If so, then I will happily give you another arsehole with the help of my pistol here, through that skull of yours. Then if the others don't comply with the conditions of our bet, I will declare war on the Shinobi Alliance, and I am pretty sure that you don't need us as your enemy, especially since the reason you wanted an alliance with us in the first place was because you were already losing a war. Naruto growled as he applied pressure to Onoki's forehead with his 5-7. The other cages and ninja were about to intervene but stopped when they heard more clicking noises, this time coming from Naruto's group. Turning to look at them, they saw that each of the bodyguards had their Colt M16A2 rifles locked on them, the captains had their Beretta M9 sidearms aimed at them, and Yugito and Fu had their Colt M14A1 Sopmod rifles also trained in on each one of them as well. For a second everyone was as still as statues, neither one wanting to throw the first blow. The tension in the room was thick as many of the shinobi and civilian side were sweating slightly, anxious about the possible battle that could occur. Each cage knew that despite their speed, only the Raikage would have a chance, and that was if he could use his Raiden no Yoroi in time before a bullet hit him first. Azukage Dono, please, there's no need to go to such extreme measures, we will give you Uzushiogakure, we give you our word. Tsunade managed to say, hoping to avoid a bloodbath. For another minute everyone was still until eventually Naruto spoke. Very well then. From now on Uzushiogakure is under the control of the UWN. Any further refusal similar to Tsuchikage Dono's will be treated as a threat and will be eliminated. Now then, let's get back to the issue at hand here. Naruto said as he holstered his weapon, along with everyone else, and retook his seat. The cages and other shinobi present let out a sigh of relief, which turned into a glare towards Onoki for almost causing the UWN to become an enemy. This was something they really, and emphasis on the really, didn't need right now. Once everyone was seated again, they heard a ringing sound coming from Naruto's helmet. Then they saw Naruto raise his right index and middle finger to his right ear and began to talk. Report. Authorization to engage Akatsuki member Deidara granted. Naruto said as the other occupants of the room jumped slightly at the order. Are you sure that was a wise idea, Azukage-sama? Members of the Akatsuki are S rank each and would even give us cages a run for our money. How can your men, who can't even use chakra, defeat such an opponent? Mei questioned. Didn't Naruto just defeat some of Konoha's top ninja with only the basic equipment we give to our troops? Naruto's group thought. Although they said it mentally, Naruto coincidentally repeated it out loud. Azukage Dono, yesterday I defeated the Konoha 11 with only standard military equipment and nothing else. What do you think my men can do when they have access to better equipment and have numbers on their side, especially since my soldiers have a sense of teamwork and comradeship that dwarfs Konoha's by miles? What do you think their odds really are? Naruto rhetorically said as the cages and councils still did not look convinced, although Gaara looked like he was attempting to see the possibilities rather than blindly say no. Seeing that almost none of them were convinced, Naruto sighed and gave a bored look before reaching up to his hologram projector again. Watch and learn. CV-67, codenamed Baseplate. Orders from Azukage-sama, permission to engage the enemy cleared. One of the sailors from the radio station informed the other occupants of the ship via radio communications. All right. Sergeant Ito Akita replied as he ran a hand through his snow-white hair. He stood at roughly 6 feet, had blue eyes and had a scar that ran down from his left eyebrow to his left cheek. His duty was to command the ships and other vehicles in the absence of his captain, Sakamoto Kumamoto. Right now he was positioned next to the helmsman overlooking the ship from the bridge. His eyes had hardened when he got news of the Akatsuki member closing in from the long-range radar they use. Taking the pair of binoculars that were strung around his neck, he gazed over the water. Soon he spotted the Deidara on a bird made of clay flying towards Baseplate at rather fast speeds with a maniacal smile on his face, dot in hands. Upon seeing the enemy, he dropped the binoculars to hang by the strings and picked up the intercom microphone. Man the Sea Sparrow anti-aircraft missile launchers. The enemy is approaching from the northeast and from a distance of 2 kilometers. Javelin launchers will be in support, and I want Remington M700 snipers to target the Akatsuki member himself. The others will try to keep his explosives away from the ship. He blared out as the alarm sounded and the men started to run to their posts. Time to send these fuckers to the lowest depths of the sea, Deidara chuckled as he closed in on the aircraft carrier. For the moment he had met no resistance, but he had noticed that they were aware of him coming towards them, judging from the increase in activity and the sirens blaring. When he was close enough, he placed his hands into the bags that contained his explosive clay and had the mouths on his hands eat the clay. When he brought them back up, he opened his palms to see the mouths chewing on the clay still. The mouths then spat out the clay to reveal small clay birds. He grinned at them as he threw them on both sides of him. She won. He grinned as they then expanded until they were as big as the one he was standing on. The 2 birds then sped ahead of him, intent on causing damage to the huge metal ship. Fire Barrage 1. Deidara looked in shock as the Sea Sparrows launched a barrage of missiles, locked onto the 2 speeding birds. In a matter of seconds the missiles made contact, causing his clay birds to explode. This is going to be harder than I thought, Deidara inwardly said as he gathered more clay into his hands. This time creating 4 birds and did the same as before. Fire barrage 2. Deidara predicted the missiles this time and guided all of his clay birds away from the missiles. He laughed when he saw them miss, but his eyes widened when he saw them following him. Shit, he cursed as he was forced to use evasive moves to fly around until eventually his clay birds were hit and exploded with smoke covering the area of impact. This led the terrorist bomber to go on the defensive. He would dodge left or right, avoiding the missiles at all cost. Then he flew across the deck hoping that he was too close for them to do anything. Bang! Gaw! He yelled out as a bullet hit him square in the chest, the force of the impact causing him to fall and hit the deck with a thud, landing near the edge of the deck. When he sat upright he had to rub his eyes as his vision was blurry. Once his vision was clear he saw that he was surrounded by sailors. Image-wise look on Google Images and type S Navy Sailor, and that they all had their Colt M16A2 rifles pointing at him. Target grounded and surrounded, sir. The sniper reported as he pulled the bolt back to his Remington, ejecting the empty cartridge onto the floor. He was at the front of the group soldiers, paying close attention to the terrorist bomber's actions. Deidara observed his surroundings, noting the soldiers that were paying close attention to him. Overall I seem to be in some pretty deep shit now. I can only hope this works, he thought as he placed his hands into his bags of clay to perform his Kabaku Jirai. Bang bang. Only to be shot in both of his arms, making them useless to him. He growled at them as they slowly moved towards him, in the hopes of subduing him and interrogating him for information. Guess I have no choice, Deidara grinned, causing the soldiers to pause, wondering what he was going to do next. The man then opened the mouth located on his chest. Seals then started to spread over his body and he began to become transparent. He laughed crazily at the thought of the destruction he would cause by using the suicide technique. Art is an explosion. Cat, bang. Deidara wasn't given the chance to finish the jutsu as a bullet was now planted in his head, courtesy of the Remington sniper. Target killed, Sergeant, he said into his radio. Roger that, take the body to the morgue for observation. Ito replied as the soldiers confirmed their orders before taking Deidara's body away. Konoha. After the commotion on the ship finished the hologram projector was turned off. When this was done everyone, minus Naruto's group, were stupefied at the display of power. Looking around Naruto saw the expressions of the cages and heard Kurama laugh in his mind. Shaking his head mentally at the kitsune he turned his attention back to the shocked cages. As you can see, despite my nation's inability to use chakra we can still hold our own against both Otogakure and the Akatsuki. Now can we move on with these talks? Naruto irritably said as the cages woke up from their shock and continued on with the talks. 3 hours later. After constantly debating between both sides they eventually came to an agreement, though not everyone was happy about it. The UWN will ally with Shinobi Alliance against Otogakure and the Akatsuki. To help prevent the loss of life the UWN will provide medical assistance, under strict guidelines, and the Shinobi Alliance will do the same with the UWN. Other than that the UWN will only take orders from their own forces, unless authorized by their captains or generals. There will be no trespassing from either side and only the leaders of either side will be allowed in each other's territory. This is the pact agreed upon and so I conclude this meeting. Mifune stated as he looked around to everyone, though some reluctantly, nod their heads. The ninja were in full agreement, the civilians were less than pleased because of their lack of gain in Danzo and the elders were fuming at the result. They were about to object but were beaten to by a certain blonde Azukage. Before we all retire I have 2 more issues that need to be addressed, or to be more specific issues concerning Konoha. Naruto said getting the attention of everyone in the room. And what would those be Azukage Dono? Tsunade asked, hoping it wasn't something big. Her hopes went unanswered. The crime committed by one Danzo Shimura and the retirement of the Uzumaki clan symbol from Konoha. This caused both the shinobi and the civilian side of the council to start denying, for different reasons. The civilians because Danzo bribed them to support him and the shinobi because of their attachment to the symbol. You can't do that, we have full rights to use that symbol. It's been with Konoha since its founding. To remove it would be to remove a piece of ourselves. Sume Inuzuka, Kiba's mother, pleaded. This was the thought that had been shared with the other Konoha shinobi. It was a very important part of their history and many people saw it as a symbol of strength. The other Kages seeing that this was only related to Konoha decided it was best to leave. Naruto saw this but didn't stop them as he saw no reason to keep them here. Looking back to the Inuzuka he frowned. I can and I will. Mito Uzumaki made Konoha promise one thing. To raise a Jinchuriki with love. This was so that whenever they had to face the Kyuubi, their love would overrule the Kyuubi's hate. You failed in that request. When my mother came to Konoha in the hopes of gaining allies so that she could claim her homeland back, you refused and abandoned the Uzumaki to save yourselves. When I was in Konoha, I was beaten by Konoha civilians and shinobi alike on my birthdays. My blood was spilt on a symbol by people who adore it yet spit on the clan who owns it. Konoha's academy doesn't even mention that the symbol they wear with pride is owned by the clan they betrayed and instead proclaims it as their own. The Uzumaki clan account was completely drained after the Kyuubi's attack to be used as either repairs or compensation when there was clearly an Uzumaki, namely me, alive and had full rights to the account. I myself was ridiculed and many people, both civilian and shinobi alike, have said how worthless my clan was. Now you say that I have no right to the symbol. Who the hell are you to say that, you kami damned hypocrites? Naruto finished yelling as the shinobi in the room could only look down in shame at the harsh truth. Calming himself down, Naruto then glared at the council with hatred. I expect the symbol to be removed within the next week. Anybody who is caught by my men wearing that symbol without my permission will be arrested and will face a court-martial. The Konoha residents raise an eyebrow, or trial. Naruto deadpanned as the shinobi nodded in silence, though the civilians didn't react at all since they never saw any real value in the symbol. Very well, Azuka Dono. Now can we move on to the case of Danzo's crime? Tsunade said glumly. Yes, I too would like to know what I have done wrong, said Man asked. Throughout the whole meeting he had said nothing as he was planning on using his Nei shinobi to steal the UWN's secrets. Naruto pulled out a book that read, Konoha Law Book. The book contained every single law that was still in effect today. It was maroon-leathered hardback and the title was written in golden letters. The size of the book was the same as Jiraiya's Icha books. I read this over a few times and noticed something that was still in effect. Clears his throat. When a shinobi is exiled, banished, she will be given a seal that will temporarily seal away her ability to use hand seals unless released by the Hokage. From here Danzo has broken this law as he didn't apply a seal that would temporarily seal my ability to use hand seals, but permanently. Therefore he will be punished. Naruto recited as Tsunade clenched her hands into fists and grit her teeth in anger. Danzo, you're under arrest and will face trial for breaking the law, Tsunade ordered as two Anbu appeared behind the man to arrest him. However, as they touched him he disappeared in a poof of smoke, signifying that he was just a clone. Damn that fool. Anbu, alert all Chunin and Jonin shinobi that Danzo Shimura is to be arrested for using an unauthorized seal. He is to be captured alive and also inform the genin of his status, but they are ordered to only look out for him. If they do spot him, they are to inform either a Chunin, Jonin or Anbu of his location. Dismissed. Tsunade ordered as the Anbu rushed to try and apprehend the elder. During all of this Naruto was looking rather down as this would mean more fighting for his men since now they would also be facing not just Akatsuki and Otogakure, but also Danzo and his Nei organization. To sum it up, he had to face 3 enemies now, 4 if you include the Shinobi Alliance as a potential enemy. Once the atmosphere had calmed down once again, Naruto stood up to conclude the meeting. Now that has been solved, I would like to give some warnings about our agreement. The medics and doctors who will help you with using our medicine will be in charge of any patient that requires their medication. This is because without the help of chakra we cannot afford to make mistakes. Too much of certain medication will kill the patient or make them even more sick, and too little will only achieve in suppressing the ailment, not cure it. Also, any misuse of our medical equipment will be in breach of our pact and in turn it will be void. In addition, my medics and doctors have taken an oath that they will help anybody who is in need of help, be it ally or enemy, so if you see my medical forces healing an enemy ninja, do not try to intervene. Doing so will also be breaking our pact. Finally, be aware that anyone who trespasses on the UWN's territory will be under our jurisdiction, not the Shinobi Alliance. Repeat this to the others and make sure they understand that they are on very thin ice. They slip up even once and we will no longer be allies, and all that we have contributed to the war will be taken back. Naruto said with finality as he and his group saluted everyone present before marching out of the room through the double doors, leaving a stone council and cage behind. Well, this is going to be troublesome. Shikamaru yawned out. Too right, friend. It'll be hard enough to convince everyone to take off the symbol, add in the other requirements, and it sure isn't going to be pretty, Choji Akamichi said in response to his close friend. Yeah, I sure will get an earful out of my clan, especially Ino. I love my daughter very much, but she does yell a lot when things don't go her way. I can't help but think that maybe I shouldn't have treated her like a princess and instead taught her some humility at the time. Sure, she has matured a lot since her academy and genin days, but she still has the tendency to revert back to them when in the company of family. Inoichi Yamanaka added as he massaged his temples when he imagined the commotion he was going to get at home. Ino would have been present as the clan head, but after training herself to exhaustion to suppress the guilt that swelled up after seeing Naruto, took a toll on her and she was currently in the hospital recovering. Many of the other clan heads were nodding in agreement, though the civilians and elders were still plotting ways to gain something out of the agreement. I need to speak with Naruto at some point, if only so that I can try and make it up to him. Tsunade thought as she dismissed the council, stood up and walked out of the room towards her office to finish her paperwork and get drunk with alcohol. Meanwhile with Naruto. Hey there stud. A pair of arms wrapped around Naruto's waist from behind as Anko leaned into his back and placed her mouth near his left ear. Anko-chan. Naruto replied as he gave her a grin in return. Before any of them could continue they heard some clicking noises coming from the group behind them. Turning to look at them they saw each of the bodyguards aiming their rifles at Anko whilst the others were tense and had their hands on their weapons, ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. Smiling Naruto waved them off, telling them that it was okay. It's all right men. She's an ally here, he said as the group relaxed, but Yugito and Fu were still glaring the duo, silently saying, explain. Upon seeing those looks Naruto mentally sweated and he could swear he heard Kurama laughing in the back of his mind. Taking Anko off of him he saw his two wives walk up to him before stopping in front of him, arms crossed. Naruto-kun, is there something you want to tell us? Fu asked with sarcasm intoned in her voice. Well you see why Yugito-chan, F Fu-chan. Yes Naruto-kun, Yugito added as she tapped her foot in irritation. Naruto gulped as he realized he couldn't screw up now. You see I was wondering if it would be okay to date Anko here with your permission, Naruto quickly said, closing his eyes and making a pained expression in preparation for the incoming feminine fury. When he didn't feel anything he opened his eyes to see the odd sight of both of his wives whispering to each other. Their expressions were hard to denote so he just stood there, waiting for the decision of what they were talking about to be made. After a minute or two they stopped communicating and gave a look towards their husband that made him confused as they looked slightly happy. We'll let you date Anko here on the condition that you treat us fairly. This also includes anyone extra you wish to date and we must approve of them. Luckily we don't have any problems with Anko here so don't worry about her, with others we may outright say no or we may want to give them a test to see if they're worthy enough. Yugito declared, with Fu nodding to emphasize the point. Oh okay. He was able to stammer out before sighing in relief and turning to Anko. Well that settles it Anko-chan. I'll take you out to a restaurant at say 8 p.m, Naruto offered. Anko nodded vigorously before giving him a quick peck on the lips before waving goodbye and heading to her apartment, which she shared with Kurenai. See you then stud. After the woman had got some distance Naruto heard some whiplash sounds being made from behind him. Turning he saw his captain snickering, his wives with smirks and their bodyguards' postures were shaking, trying to rein in their laughter. Come on. He huffed and carried on walking to the hospital to check on Ayame. The snickering of his soldiers and the giggling of his wives following close behind him. Time skip. Konoha Hospital reception. As the group entered the hospital Naruto saw Inoue arguing with the head doctor. He along with the others raised an eyebrow in confusion. What's going on, kid? Something is telling me this isn't going to end well. That seems to be happening all right, Naruto thought as he continued to watch one of his captains argue with the head doctor. You know kid, I have been wondering why that Senju isn't in charge of the hospital, given it's her speciality, Kurama asked his host. It's because she's the Hokage. She can give new techniques to the hospital, but she can't have full control over how it's run. This is due to the fact that Tsunade only has control over the shinobi of Konoha, and since this hospital also takes in civilians the control of the hospital was given to someone the council and Hokage agreed on was best suited. The problem here though is that during the time period between the Sandame's death and the Godime's inauguration the council had full control over Konoha. So they appointed someone who didn't like me in an effort to kill me through negligence in my medical care. The shinobi side didn't want this, but couldn't since they were outvoted by both the civilian council and the elders at the time. The person appointed also can't be removed unless 3/4 of the entire government agree, though given how it's only half and half I'm not surprised nothing has changed. Naruto explained to his tenant. Soon the argument stopped, Inoue sighed in what could only be defeat before conversing in more quiet tones. They eventually finished and the head doctor walked away to what could only be seen as his office. Inoue then spotted them and hurried to report to her superior. Azuka-sama. She saluted, prompting everyone, minus Naruto and his wives, to salute in return. Report. Physical wounds are minor, cuts, scratches and bruises. All have been treated and so she is physically fit to leave. However mentally I can't say the same, she is scared of all men except you and her father. She will recover but I fear that it will never permanently go away, so in the future I would suggest keeping men from getting too close to her and that you or her father stays close to her. Now normally we would transfer this kind of patient to a recovery room where she can get therapy to help her deal with the event. However, apparently here it's a different story. All they treat are physical wounds and injuries. This is why I was arguing with the head doctor. He said that because physically she can leave that they will discharge her without treating the emotional wounds. I argued no, but he wouldn't have it and gave me an ultimatum: either she leaves within 24 hours or they force her out. Inoue finished grimly as she saw the anger coming from her comrades. No worries, Inoue-san. Contact Tuchi Ichiraku and tell him to come to the hospital. He will help move Ayame to the helicopters where we will arrange for them to move back to the UWN. You may find him at the Hueys now. Naruto ordered as she saluted, took the 2 bodyguards she had with her and walked out of the hospital. All right, let's check on Ayame. Then we'll go back to the hotel. You're all free to do as you wish from there on, Naruto said as he walked towards Ayame's room. The group followed him, each cursing the incompetent hospital staff. When they were close to the girl's room, Naruto raised his right hand, telling his group to stop. A few seconds passed before all 3 generals tensed, causing the others to tense as well. I've detected 3 people inside Ayame's room that shouldn't be there. Yugito, Fu and I will take care of them. In the meantime, I want everyone else to head back to the Hueys and await further orders. Be prepared for a fight. Sir, yes sir, his group replied, turning and leaving the trio alone in the corridor. Let's go. Yugito and Fu nodded, looking just as serious as their husband. The 3 stacked up on either side of the door. Naruto on the left-hand side with Fu next to him and Yugito on the opposite side of the door. All right. We have a civilian hostage inside on the bed. With her are 3 ninjas who should not be there. Yugito-chan will breach the door. I will enter first with Yugito-chan following and then Fu-chan following her. Rules of engagement. Hostage priority. Kill all enemies, but Ayame's protection comes first. Naruto ordered. Yugito and Fu nodded as all 3 pulled out their Colt M4A1 rifles and cocked both weapons in preparations. Naruto then raised his right hand and proceeded to count down from 5 by reducing the number of fingers he had raised. 0.5. 0.4. 0.3. 0.2. 0.1. 0.0. As soon as he reached 0, Yugito slid the door quickly open, drawing the attention of the shinobi inside the room, each wearing the attire of Otogakure. They were arranged so that one was hovering over the bed with a kunai, one was near the window and the final one was near the door. The room itself, imagine looking through the doorway. The bed is attached to the wall on the right and the window is directly opposite the door. Swinging himself through the door, Naruto fired a shot at the man over the bed, hitting him dead in the head. The force of the impact causing the man to fall backwards to the floor with blood spraying out of his forehead, the man's face in a state of shock. Immediately the one nearest the door lunged at Naruto with kunai in hand as well, whilst the other ninja ran for the window. Before the ninja could strike, he too was shot, but this time in the chest from Yugito as the man fell forward on the ground, blood pooling around his form. The third assailant jumped out of the window and it looked like he was going to make it to the roof opposite. Boom! Until he was blown to pieces from a shot fired from Fu's grenade launcher, causing blood to splash onto the hospital. The commotion made the civilians panic whilst the ninja went to investigate. Auto Nin, why am I not surprised? Naruto asked rhetorically as he scanned Ayame and found nothing wrong with her. He then checked the status of the 2 Auto Nin. The one near the bed was obviously dead unless the man could survive having metal forcibly pushed into his brain. He then heard a groan come from the second man and quickly rushed to him. What are your orders here in Konoha? Tell me now and I will relieve you of the pain, Naruto demanded coldly. We were sent to kill. All of the weakest. People who were precious to. You and frame Konoha. Afterwards we were to meet with 20 others. In the market square at midnight. Now please. Save me. The man said as his vision blurred. Naruto stood up and pointed his rifle at the man's head. His eyes widened and he tried to struggle but froze when he heard Naruto speak. I said I would relieve you of the pain. I didn't say I would save your life. Naruto then pulled the trigger, ending his life knowing he had been tricked. It was then that the cages appeared in room. Looking around they saw the 2 corpses and had noticed the bloodstains on the hospital walls outside. What the hell happened here? Tsunade bellowed as the 3 generals turned their attention to the blonde Hokage. Auto Nin. 3 of them. I killed the one near the bed, Yugito-chan killed the one near the door and Fu-chan killed the one that jumped out the window. Their orders were to kill all those who were weak, but precious to me. Then they would meet up with 20 others in the market square at midnight. Naruto recounted as cages looked at each other in shock that many Auto Nin could so easily get into Konoha. Well, we need to plan. You will not plan anything. Naruto interrupted Tsunade without even looking at her. The reactions this got were mainly the cages looking at Tsunade intently, wondering what her reaction was. What do you mean we won't plan anything? Tsunade demanded, angry at the prospect that they would allow Orochimaru's forces just strut about in her village. I didn't say I wouldn't plan anything, I said you wouldn't. These ninja were under orders to hurt those who were close to me and were too weak to defend themselves. I want to send a message to both Orochimaru and Akatsuki that basically says, fuck with me and I fuck you over tenfold. Now you can either sit back and watch or do whatever, but do not under any circumstances interfere. Do so and you will be punished for obstructing an operation. Naruto said with finality as the cages scowled but didn't say anything. Good, now this is what I plan to do. Time skip. 8 p.m. Anko and Kurenai's apartment. Coming. Kurenai shouted as she heard a knock on their door. Opening it, she saw Naruto standing outside in a tuxedo, but instead of the normal bow tie it had a straight black tie. She couldn't help but blush lightly as she took in his form, as the getup was a bit tight, showing an outline of his muscled body. When Naruto saw the blush he grinned before looking in the apartment for Anko. Ahem. I believe that Anko-chan and I have a date, so could you please call her down please? He asked. Kurenai could only nod dumbly before calling out to Anko without taking her eyes off the blonde. That you, Naruto-kun? He heard reply from upstairs. Yeah. I have a great idea for a restaurant. Okay, I'm coming down now. Soon Anko came down the stairs, wearing a purple dress that reached to her shins. It was held up by one strap on her right shoulder and had a slit up the right side. Her hair was down from its usually pineapple ponytail and she had a single golden earring pierced on her left ear. Wow. Naruto sighed out, getting a blush from the woman in question. Holding her head up high, she strode to man and interlocked her right arm with his left. Thanks, Naruto-kun. Now Kurenai-chan, I'll be back at 11 p.m. See you later. Anko said as waved to her friend goodbye and started to walk through the streets, her date right next to her. When they had gone round the corner, Kurenai closed the door to the apartment and went to bed, deciding to get some sleep, though her dreams were about the blonde man she had seen a moment ago. Time skip. Golden Leaf. Wow, you're taking me here. This is the top restaurant in Konoha. I sure hope they do dango though. Anko finished in a disappointed tone, thinking if her favorite food would not be served here since it wasn't known to be a very fancy food. Naruto chuckled at his date's prediction. Dango would always be her one weakness when it came to things that weren't ninja related, and to him it was one of the cutest things about her. Yugito had a similar thing for fish and he always enjoyed the pouch she would pull when she couldn't have any. Seems good so far, he thought as they approached the entrance to the Golden Leaf. A waitress was waiting near the entrance, which upon recognizing her caused Naruto to grin. Table for two, sir? The waitress asked with a knowing smirk. Yes, madam. Could we have the VIP table please? Certainly, sir. Please follow me. The waitress then pulled out two menus and led to Duo past the astonished looks being sent their way by the other patrons. The looks though were soon replaced with negative sneers, glares or other kinds of looks that could be associated with dissatisfaction. They ignored the looks, though Anko had stiffened slightly before Naruto assured her nothing would happen. After they had taken their seats, the waitress asked what they would be having. I think I will have the yakizakana with a side order of miso soup, and I would like some of your best sake available. Naruto said as the waitress then turned towards Anko, who ordered the yakisoba with a side order of dango and also sake. After the waitress took their orders, she retrieved the menus and went to the kitchen to pass on the order, leaving the two to talk for a little while. So what's the final conclusion on the negotiations? Anko asked. Neutral with benefits. We will provide medical assistance throughout the war and will fight the enemy, but that is all we are doing. If a team of shinobi are under attack and my men are able to aid them, they do not have to help. They may help if given permission or if they can give a good reason to save them. Other than that, we are to stay out of each other's way. If a ninja from the Alliance commits a crime against us, then he will be under our jurisdiction. The reverse can be said if one of our soldiers commits a crime against the Alliance. Not that that is likely to happen, hopefully. I mean, I would rather have my time spent trying to win this war and leave, rather than constantly having to punish people for crimes. Naruto replied with a tired look. Anko was about to ask another question but was interrupted by the arrival of their food. She decided then it was best to leave it at that and instead focus on having a good time. A couple of hours passed before the two finished, paid for their meals, Naruto paying for both at his insistence, and made their way back to Anko's shared apartment. I take this as goodbye then? Anko asked as she leaned her back against the door and crossed her arms, with a smirk adorning her face. Not forever. Just for a little while. After all, I need to start taking part in this war that my nation has been dragged into, but I promise to take you out again at some point. Who knows, you might as well invite Kurenai to come along next time. Naruto replied cheekily, adding a wink that caused Anko to blush at the implications. She then uncrossed her arms and turned around quickly to open the door. When she was in the doorway, she quickly spun round and gave Naruto a long kiss that initially shocked the blonde, though he promptly returned the kiss. After a moment, the two separated, panting slightly. That was for luck, and please be careful. You are so far the only one who hasn't wanted to date me just to get into my pants, and I don't know what I'll do if something bad happens to you, she said softly before closing the door, leaving Naruto outside contemplating on her words. I will be careful, he said to no one in particular, sighing at the end and running his right hand down his face. Have a nice evening, sir, he heard a voice say rhetorically. Looking to his right, he saw the waitress from before walk towards him, a smirk plastered on her face. It was okay. Anyway, are we ready for the operation, Captain Fujita? The woman's smirk widened as she pulled off her wig and took out her contact lenses. Yes, sir. Everything is ready. Naruto gave a smirk of his own as he tapped his right wrist with his left index and middle fingers. His clothes phased for a moment before they disappeared entirely, revealing his armor, weapons and trench coat. Then let's get going. Time skip. Konoha Market Square, 12 a.m. The place was a large open area and paved so that the merchants, both foreign and domestic, could sell their goods and services. Recently, the place had been used by many spies in Konoha, as the civilian council was able to pass a law that forbid ninja from patrolling the area as it scared the customers. Naturally, Tsunade had been against the idea, as well as the clan heads, but once again they had been outvoted by the civilian council, the then still active Danzo and the village elders. Due to the lack of ninja around, many spies saw it as the best opportunity to report back to their superiors and were able to give them many secrets about Konoha that could have been prevented if the law hadn't been placed. It had also been used for the civilian council members and village elders to meet up with their less legal contractors. When Naruto planned out the operation, his briefing was interrupted by the civilians and elders barging in and telling him smugly that ninja were not allowed in the market square, hoping to keep him from discovering their illegal activities. In return, he had grinned at them and replied, "Well, it's a good thing my subordinates are soldiers and not ninja." He then proceeded to turn his back to the group of stunned council members and elders. Realizing they had lost, they had harumphed and walked out of the briefing, many of the room's occupants snickering as they left. Presently, the square was playing host to 20 Otogakure ninja who were tasked with finding and eliminating any defenseless supporters of the UWN, then kill the UWN group's leader. It was a fairly easy task to find the supporters and only had to send 3 ninja to deal with them, but so far no word had been sent back about their status. This caused the Auto Nin to be tense and nervous for the time being. Everything ready? Yes, General Uzumaki. Good. Now let's begin Operation Pest Extermination. Sir, yes sir. At that moment, all of the Auto Nin were blinded by spotlights that had been placed up on all of the buildings. The light exposed the Auto Nin, taking away their cover of darkness. In addition, it kept Naruto's own men hidden from view as the lights kept the Auto Nin from finding them. Auto Nin, you have tried to hurt people who are close to me, and for that your lives are forfeit. Any last words? Naruto shouted. He stood up on the roof of one of the buildings, staring impassively at the Auto Nin below him in an at-ease stance. The Auto Nin were startled by the voice and desperately tried to locate the voice but couldn't due to the intense light. Everywhere they looked was covered in white, some trying to cover their eyes so that they didn't go blind. Who are you? Show yourself. Those were some of the outbursts that the more hardened ninja could give, though the rest were trembling, shaking, in fear, and started increasing their efforts to locate the man who they were ordered to kill. It was then that they noticed that a shadow had been cast over them from somebody standing in front of one of the spotlights. Up on one of the roofs stood Naruto in full combat gear and trench coat, though his arms weren't in the sleeves. His posture was one of aggressiveness, his left hand fingering his sword attached to his left side, and a glare that if looks could kill would have already sent the Auto Nin 6 feet under. When all of the Auto Nin recognized the man as their target, 5 of them transformed into Zetsu clones and launched themselves at the blonde standing before them with a war cry. Despite the imminent danger, Naruto made no motion to move or give any orders. In fact, he seemed to not even be looking at the clones that were getting closer to him by the second. 10 meters. 6 meters. 4 meters. 2 meters. Bang, 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 bang. Naruto sidestepped the now corpses that flew past him and landed in heap behind him, each with a bullet implanted in their skulls. The shooters were Chaitak intervention-wielding snipers, all 5 of them firing their shots in synchronization. After the shots rang out, many of the windows were open to reveal soldiers carrying Colt M16A2 rifles and taking aim at the, now surrounded, Auto Nin. The rooftops around the square also became populated with soldiers rushing out and taking positions for battle, but this time with a mixture of M249 saw light machine guns and M32 multiple grenade launchers. Seeing that the Oto Nin were trapped, Naruto decided to give them one last talk before continuing. When you put on that Oto Hite 8, you signed a silent contract to serve your nation and leader. That leader has sent you here on a mission that was almost guaranteed death. Die knowing that you failed a mission for a bunch of lunatics. Naruto then turned around and walked away from the slaughter that was to occur. As soon as Naruto had finished speaking, all of the soldiers opened fire. The riflemen, machine gunners and grenade launchers obliterating the Oto Nin. Some were hit multiple times, some were hit only once, and some were blown to oblivion. Any ninja that made it to the edge of the square were picked off by the snipers. The shots also caused many small lights that would allow one to see the battle from far away, and was accompanied by the screaming of the dying men and women. By the end of the massacre, it had started raining, making the square run with blood covering it almost entirely. Corpses and body parts littered the ground with the heads in a permanent look of pain and fear. Craters both large and small caused by multiple explosions and bullets were made in the ground. The Kages and Mifunes stared at the scene in horror and glanced at the Azukage to see not a single ounce of regret on the man's face. To them it was one of the most terrible things they had seen, just beating the Shinobi wars. "Why didn't you spare any of them? They would have had information that we could have used," Onoki said. Naruto looked at the Tsuchikage but noticed that he wasn't looking at him. Following the man's gaze, he saw that he was still looking over the square where the battle had commenced. Both Akatsuki and Orochimaru never give vital information to these kinds of subordinates. They would have likely only have known their mission details and nothing more. Plus remember the reason for why I did this with only my soldiers. Fuck with me and I fuck you tenfold. I meant what I said, this was an example. He replied nonchalantly, though the Kages and Mifune turned to look at him in shock. What do you mean, set an example? We're the only ones who witnessed this. Tsunade cried out, wondering what happened to the boy who tried to avoid killing when it wasn't necessary. His response was to look at a tree in the far distance. Following his gaze, they froze when they caught a brief look at the dark half of Zetsu as he melded into the tree and disappeared. That was why, and don't go thinking about capturing him now. That man is a prodigy when it comes to getting out of situations. The best way to deal with him will be to bait him to an area where chakra is cut off, then take him. For now though, I will be returning to my transports to go back to headquarters. I will also be having Tuchi and Ayame Ichiraku accompanying me, as the two would like to move and gain citizenship to the UWN. Can I trust you, Tsunade Dono, to make sure the civilian council don't try to use your ninja to forcibly take them back? Naruto asked the Hokage. Tsunade nodded, though, as she was still trying to imagine the orange ball of sunshine that convinced her to become Hokage in the first place. What happened to you, Naruto? Seeing this, Naruto shook his head and left the leaders of the Shinobi Alliance to talk amongst themselves. Meanwhile, so the Jinchuriki is more tenacious than before. This throws a rather large wrench into my plans. I need those 3 Biju for my Dasuki no Mi Kikaku to come to fruition. Zetsu, keep an eye on them and obtain any information that catches your attention. Madara said as Zetsu nodded and melded into the floor. Once he was gone, Madara turned towards Orochimaru. Have your men prepared for any assault that the UWN or the Alliance may have planned for use. Of course. Orochimaru then walked out of the cave, planning on adding capturing Sasuke to the orders in order to gain the Sharingan. Madara then turned to his last subordinate. Sasori, how have the development of those weapons been? Not well, Madara-sama. The materials we have here just aren't strong enough to handle the strain. Take this for example. The puppet user then pulled out a brown Bess musket. Creating a Doden. Kage Bunshin, he handed it the musket and ordered it to load and fire it. The clone took a long time in a vulnerable position to load the weapon, and firing it caused Madara to drop the idea. The clone had been killed as the weapon exploded upon being fired, blasting the clone in fire and splinters. Yes, it would appear that this contraption will be of no use to us. Throw it away and continue to prepare to leave at a moment's notice. Sasori nodded and left his leader to gather supplies and upgrade his existing puppets. Once he was gone, Madara let out a sigh he didn't know he had been holding. This is becoming more and more difficult. At this rate my plan won't work. I need more allies. Perhaps I can help you with that. When he heard that voice, Madara sighed again and looked towards the newcomer. And why, pray tell, should I listen to you? The figure took a step forward, revealing to be the recently declared traitor, Danzo. Because I know all of Konoha's current secrets and plans. The end. Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.